Okay, we are live now, and no one's watching yet, but welcome. And we're just gonna go right into it.
All right.
And we're gonna be reviewing today this Creationist Camp video by Standing for Truth. And obviously, they think they're gonna educate us, but I don't see how that's very possible. So let's just jump right into it. And they pretty much start like 11 minutes in. So I think we're gonna.
Yeah,
Do you want to
they had
listen
a
to
long
your part, or do you want to skip through the part you're talking? Maybe we'll just do it for context.
yeah. So you can play my part, and then we respond to it. So the first part of their video was more or less they trying to set it up, and I kind of preamble about They said that I was asking many questions, and I was complaining that Bill Morgan was asking questions. But the thing was, my questions wasn't actually directed to Bill. I wasn't expecting him to answer the questions. And if you listen to the context of it, you realize I was asking like, how do we answer this? It's not necessarily I'm trying to answer it. It's just something I use as a means of making the argument. But I wasn't expecting him to answer. I didn't press him on it. I didn't demand that he answer it, because when he did his questions in his opening, he said, "I hope that Mike addresses them." And then I did my opening after, and then he came back and he said, you didn't address the questions, but that was your opening. I hope you address them in your rebuttal. And then at the end, he did it again. We asked the question. He asked the question again, and he said, "I hope Mike answer these questions." And even when I didn't answer them after I did my rebuttal, he was, it could seem like he was disappointed that I didn't address it. So he wanted me to answer the questions in real time. But the reason why I didn't actually address the questions, why I wasn't really for that thing, is because I saw he did that with you doing it during your debate. What happened was, I realized what he did was he wanted to go first. I realized at first he wanted to go. For some reason, he just wanted to go first. All right. And I realized with you in your debate is he asked a lot of questions. And what you did wrong was to fall for it. And instead of actually giving a full presentation, your presentation was occupied by trying to answer his questions. So that I feel that's a tactic he's using, whereby you would ask these questions, and then his opponent, instead of actually giving a presentation, they were busy trying to answer the questions. So I kind of ignored that, and I made my own thing where I would address arguments of him and stand for truth, and then the rebuttal part was just him. So I said I'll rebut his arguments, and just ignore the questions for now, because obviously I wouldn't be able to answer them in real time. So I just went to his website, got some arguments that he uses, and make a presentation based on that.
Yeah, that's definitely one of our tactics. I kind of enjoy trying to meet whatever challenge they bring, so I'm all for it. But they definitely do. It's part of the distraction tactic for sure.
Yeah.
But that's kind of I like to do kind of follow-up debates too, because then I get to know that, like, specifically what problems they have with my argument, um, and kind of try and use their logic or mirror their logic and twist it back on them.
Right. I and usually that's how I formulate my arguments. All creationist arguments can be refuted in with that similar kind of formula.
Yeah, because it's
You
all special pleading.
Yeah, you take what they reject, you add to what they accept, and then you make an argument on it. It's simple, because they would reject things they accept. For example, when they argue that you can't change, but they would accept that organisms can have very, very different chromosome numbers within the same kind. So you can't say it can't change chromosome number when you accept it. So that alone would crumble the argument.
Yeah, someone was telling me today, they were like, I don't even know that zebras and horses are related. And it's like, okay, well then you have a huge overcrowding problem on the arc then. It's like they flip-flop back and forth whatever they need for the argument at the time.
Right. It is actually so, because there are certain things that, for example, standing for truth, and if you ask next, you might say something different. Or usually I would debate on Facebook. creations on Facebook, if I would cite RawMatt's work, and they don't accept what he said. So, for example, he recently said that he accepted that all grass, that would include things like corn and wheat and rice and bamboo and so on, right? Sugarcane and everything.
Yeah, to me
So he
that is
accepted all.
obviously macroevolution.
That is macroevolution by
Yeah,
anyone's definition. But
total
he said that
morphological difference. I
he
mean,
said that they're just grasses. They're just grasses. And I remember asking that same question, because the questions I asked is not necessarily new. It's questions I used before, and some creation I just use it from creation to creationist, and it would vary. The answers would vary, always vary, never the same, because there's not a consensus. Let us say they can go to answers in Genesis, they don't even have on what is a grass kind or whatever. I remember seeing a video from answers in Genesis that says the grass kind, but I don't think they wanted to say the grass kind. They wanted to say the things that look like grasses, like, but I don't think they want to include things like corn and bamboo and rice and so on. I don't think maybe lawn grasses, those kind of grasses, but I don't think they want to include all the grasses, because that's a lot of evolution.
yeah, they kind of seem to ignore plants anyway. Like they just kind of assume that they survived the flood, but you can't really stick a plant underwater for very long until it dies. At least most of them.
Well, they don't particularly pay attention to plants and like crustaceans, fishes, and so on, because they don't think don't have to, squabble around to try. Well, they think they don't have to try to explain the diversity, but it's still a problem.
Yeah.
It's because even though they don't have the they say the flood don't they didn't have to be reduced to kinds on the ark. They still have the time problem, because even if you want to accept that, for example, corn and bamboo are of the same kind, you have 6,000-7,000 years, even 10,000 years, some of them would say. That is not enough time to accumulate that difference. That there is no, nothing that they can provide that can support that these things could have diverged just 10,000 years.
Yep. And we'll hear a lot of those arguments here. So should we just start?
Yeah, you can go ahead with it. You can start from where they start off.
All right, here we go.
Irreducible complexity. All right, my slides are not changing, so that. Okay, it's changing now. Okay, so chicken and egg problems or irreducible complexity. Now, the first thing we need to know about irreducible complexity is that irreducible complexity is a description of the current state of a given biological system and not its evolutionary history.
I don't know where that is. I don't think that's its opening. Is it? If it is, that's later on. That wasn't the very beginning.
Oh, okay, here it is. I got it.
Creation versus evolution, which is the better explanation? And my primary argument in support of my position, evolution, is that the distribution of diagnostic traits shared between any two or more groups of fundamentally similar organisms is best explained by common descent as opposed to common design. From a creationist perspective, when it comes to biology, why are the first two groups considered common descent, but the third common design? What justifies the change in logic from common descent to common design? Or in fact, what justifies the assertion of common design to begin with?
Well,
here we take a look at what common design has for.
You mean to pause it there?
No, no, keep going. I didn't know what was going on.
And again, I'm talking about biology.
I didn't hear
so common design is not observable. It is not measurable. There is no mechanism of design. It makes no specific predictions as to how species should appear or when they should appear. And there seems to be nothing that could falsify the assumption.
Okay, you could pause.
Common descent, on the other hand, is observable, measurable.
Okay, basically he said regarding evolution, it makes predictions on organisms that would appear and how they should appear. Well, he's talking about the fossil record here. Basically, they lined things up and said, see, that's what the story is. Well, okay. Predict for me then today where humans will be headed. You can't do that. Predict where any species is headed. predict where a plant is headed. You can quickly see that without a made-up line of bones or fossils or plants lined up telling a story, that they have no ability to predict anything. They said that they predicted it after they already went after the evidence.
All right, I think that's a good place to jump in. I mean, it's hard to
So-
predict what the environment's going to do, but we've predicted a lot of things. You want to go
right.
ahead?
So basically, he's under the assumption that ever has a goal in mind, so you can predict where it's going. That's not how
Mhm.
evolution works. That thinking is orthogenetic, where organisms have this predestination to reach, where they would evolve to reach the stage they are. That's why, for example, the mark of progress, for example, where you see a little ape go up into a man. That's orthogenetic. That it's implying that it's going in a specific direction, but that's not actually how evolution works. It's a more branching something. It's kind of random in regards to where it's going. So you can't necessarily predict where organisms would be heading. You can predict that organisms would adapt to environment, that they would evolve mechanisms to adapt. As to the exact mechanisms, you may not be able to predict that. But what you can do is, based on what you know about the history of the organism, you can predict where the organism came from, based on the structure of the organism or the anatomy of the organism. You can predict that. Okay, for example, you study, let's say, a manatee, and you notice that it has a reduced pelvis and so on, and it has toenails. Now, they don't necessarily
Yeah.
need toenails. I don't think they can. But that alone can tell you that, okay, I think that based on the anatomy of the animal, the embryology of the animal, it seems like this animal was derived from a terrestrial animal. So I can predict that if evolution be true, that this animal was derived from a terrestrial animal, then we should find transitional forms that would show, stage the gap from the terrestrial state to the aquatic state, and that's exactly what you find, like, with manatees. The same with whales, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, all the marine tetrapods. You would find that, so you can predict what you would find. But you can't predict where it would go because evolution doesn't have a goal in mind. So I think it's mistaken here. Also, it's not only bones you can predict. You can predict in living things as well what you would find, what you would never find. For example, evolution predict that you would never find any amphibian sporting feathers for any reason, or you would never find an animal having flowering parts or leaves or cellulose walls like plant cells. So you can predict what living things would never have.
Like a lizard with
It's
breasts.
right, the lizard with breasts and so on. You won't find a lizard with breasts because the mammary glands evolved way after lizards diverged. So you would find that you can find like similar convergent traits, but never the same trait on an organism like that. So you would never ever find feathers on an amphibian. We can predict that. Or we could never find. What else you can predict that? Well, all for example, all multicellular organisms, all chordates, all deuterostomes, all of them would have eukaryotic cells. All plants would have eukaryotic cells. So you can predict what the structure of the organism would be made of. You can predict the type of genes they would have, especially the developmental genes, because you know what type of organism it is. You can predict what else you can predict about living things.
Well, I've got a whole list.
Yeah, you can go over the list because I'm just going off my head with that one.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm going to point out too, there's a difference between predicting the fossils, like between a start and an end point that you already have versus only having the starting point, because you can reasonably, what traits this has in its evolutionary history. So it's a different kind of prediction. And creationists never really seem to address this fact of predictive model other than to say that they make predictions, but all they're doing is taking science that scientists just do on their own, and then just claiming it's consistent with creationism, and then claiming that as a creationist prediction, and that's not how it works. But as far as predicting, evolution has been able to predict where animals will head in the wild, and we've been able to see what little we can see in the timescales that we've been observing this. So we see similar rates of niche speciation on islands that like island lizards. So we can predict that all of these different islands, they'll have some lizards that are more adapted to the trees, that are more adapted to the shallow waters, that are more adapted to the rocky places, and we can see that they all have the nested hierarchies of traits that can pretty much be traced back to the original ancestor that was on the island. So, and on all these islands, there's a similar rate and niches. And then some more specific examples. There's that famous one, the blindness in the fish was predicted, the cave fish. And then the creationists will say it's epigenetic, but it doesn't really matter because it's inherited modification. That's how it works. And it's a step towards fundamentally changing a species. I would say blindness is a fundamental change in a species, and they're not necessarily inferior. They just don't need eyes. So that's just how evolution works. It doesn't necessarily make inferior or superior animals. It's just, or organisms. It's just that they are plastic to the environment. And in a sense, there is entropy for the traits that aren't being selected for. They just go away. The eyes will just go away because there's no selection pressure for that. The other traits are being selected for, so they stay. Farmers and breeders predict how plants and livestock are going to change all the time. Without genetic engineering. This is just breeding. For example, the rest are going to be mostly diseases at this point, at least in the wild. So, like with MRSA, that evolved from a less virulent strain, and this was a huge concern in epidemiology before we even started seeing MRSA. Like, we knew we were creating superbugs by putting like these ridiculous selection pressures on them, and that causes a dangerous bottleneck effect that lets the resistant strains totally take over the population. And then, see, that's another thing that creationists don't quite get is populations evolve, not individuals. It's about how the number of individuals with a certain trait will take over a population. And that's what happens with superbugs, and we predicted that was going to happen, and the mechanism by which it would happen. And some more diseases, flu, we use evolutionary models to accurately predict the strains that will emerge and which will be most successful in the populations, and then we immunize based on that. And we have to continuously do this because flu viruses evolve really quickly. So similar thing with HIV, except evolution helped even more with this, because knowing that HIV came from apes and other ape-like derived diseases like Ebola even, we're able to treat and study and even cure some of these diseases with knowing where they came from and being able to study how they made that leap and use what they came from as models, because we are so closely related. That's how the leap was made so easily. And then things like avian bird flu, swine flu, they weren't predicted to last long in humans because they're much more finely adapted to non-human hosts. So the diseases that infect more closely related organisms like apes, they survive better in our systems than the ones that come from less related organisms. And then atavisms shouldn't be possible in young Earth creationism unless you admit that mutation can build new structures and new information, or the other alternative is that you admit there's a whole history of genetic information left over from previous forms. So that's pretty much a creation killer in my opinion. And then as far like we can predict, that was just predicting in the wild, and there are multiple, way more examples than I can compile. But I'll quickly go over some of the things we've predicted in the lab. Obviously, SFT really disagrees with Lenski, but they predicted the evolution of citrate enzymes, and mutations built that genetic information. Let's see, the multicellular algae, they have forced this algae to evolve based on mimicking natural selection from literally just pressure to like physical pressure. They made them evolve that way, and they also subjected them to the pressures of predation, and they both evolved in the same way, where they genetically locked their cell number to have an 8-celled body, and that came from single-celled organisms. So and we've done multiple experiments on tissue differentiation, fly genetics experiments, made calculations for that predicted the natural range of fly wing variation, and the evolutionary history of the fly wing variation. There's been experiments with walking fish raised on land. They can walk better just by being raised on land. And they only have fins. They don't even have like rigid foot-like fins like Tiktaalik. They have no special like land-based anatomy. They just have lungs. And then, so this basically proves that existing parts can be repurposed and improved for these specific tasks. So you can take a fish and it can walk, and you can make minor adjustments to that. And there's no morphological or biological or genetic limitation to that creationists have ever proposed. It was predicted that if birds are dinosaurs, we should be able to genetically manipulate them, and we should be able to get dinosaur parts out of that. And most of that is done by inactivating genes or taking away genes. So we're revealing like this underlying evolutionary structure, and that it happens in embryology too. And I know the creationists are going to have a problem with this because it's done in a lab and not nature, but laboratories replicate natural phenomenon that we know happens in nature. And but the point is that laboratories allow us to isolate variables, and that's something that that creationists don't seem to know much about. Yeah, that's my quick list so far. Anything else to add before we go?
Let me see. Something about in regards to evolution of parts. It's something Neff would say. Evolution can't change anatomy, but it never actually defines what a change in anatomy would be. He says, well, what he's saying is that change in morphology is different from change in anatomy. But from what I can get,
morphology is defined as a subset of anatomy, first of all. But sorry, go on.
Yes, I don't really know what you're trying to say, but I guess what he's saying is that a change in anatomy would be like the addition of a part that wasn't there before. I guess that's what he was trying to say, because I remember when he was saying that, I think he was saying humans or chimps, or either or, has more vertebra, more back vertebrae than the other. A change in anatomy. But then when I explain, well, not necessarily a change in anatomy, well, if you want to call it that, then which means that you already accept that, because when I mentioned that pigs, for example, we were able to breed pigs with longer rib cages, that they have more ribs and more longer spines. And for some reason, he tried to jump off that topic onto something else. He started to interrupt me and so on. And I realized that because he doesn't have a proper definition for change anatomy, that's what's happening. He's not defining it in a way that would be. What I want him to do is to define change in anatomy that is different. That would be something that is different from how it's, and explain how it's different from the changes we see within kinds. Because we do see things within kinds that would have different number of bones, a different number of muscles, different number of whatever, and it's not a problem for them. They would accept it. But as soon as you go beyond kinds, they say, well, within the kinds is acceptable. What between kinds is not.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, atavisms destroy Nephilim's logic on that, because unless there is that evolutionary history behind it, then they are just getting new parts, new anatomical parts, just de novo, and that shouldn't happen in creationism. And but
Well,
the way evolution works is all the supposedly new parts are just repurposed from old parts. Like you just fold the skin differently, or you get more skin, or you just manipulate the shape of a bone, or it's kind of the same thing in the genome itself. You can make more genome by duplication, and then you can change what's in it. Same thing with all parts. You can only work with the existing parts.
so usually how they try to explain like atavisms and vestiges, they would say that it's maybe a degraded version of an original something. That's how they explain it. That it's not new, something new. If you see an atavism coming up, they would say, well, it is just something that was a throwback to what was there at creation, pretty much. That. So that's pretty much the argument they use.
So
But of course, it
humans
doesn't.
have monkey tails.
I guess as much we had tails. So it doesn't actually explain much, but that's what they would use. And the thing is, the creation is kind of on fire. You can see that can falsify the creation itself, because God can do anything. So it doesn't matter how it comes, it comes. God, if you find an organism made out of clay, God made the organism. God made it that way. Common design, common designer. Different design, the designer just had a different plan. So it doesn't matter how it comes, it's still creation. There is no way to prove it wrong. There's no way to prove it right. So I don't know. It's not a useful hypothesis in regard. For example, created heterozygosity. It's a very useless hypothesis, because it doesn't place any limitation on variation, because any limitation on variation would be a limitation on God's ability to create. So if if a creationist say that this can't the variation can't go beyond this, what they're actually saying is that God could make it go beyond that, which can't happen because God can do anything. And then have that loop where the logic just falls upon itself. So that created heterozygosity, it's something they use to get out of their own arguments, such as the waiting time problem and Halden's dilemma. They would say, well, we don't need to apply that because God just created the differences. But then you fall back into the same trap you try to get out of in regards to accepting evolution. So now you have no grounds for denying large scale evolution, because again, God could have just built in the variation to begin with. So
And that seems like a more intelligent, greater being to me, personally. And like a framework, so I wouldn't call it an explanation, but they think it's an explanation. Why that's so attractive to them is because you can just use magic whenever you're stumped. It's just the god of the gaps, really.
right. So they can explain anything, but they explain everything by explaining nothing, though, because they don't explain the mechanisms of design or how God is doing that or whatever. So nothing is actually being explained other than to say, well, that's how God can do it. Possibly God did it that way, but that doesn't explain anything. We don't want to know the mechanisms, because the thing about design is, even like archaeologists, when they study pyramids and so on, they don't just say this was designed and stop. They go on to try to explain how the pyramids were built, how these structures were built, not to just look at it and say, oh, this is complex, I think this was designed. No, you have to provide a mechanism of design. And that's where creationism or intelligent design, all of them fall short, because they have no mechanism of design. As with evolution, we can see things that appear to be designed and propose mechanisms as to how these things come to be, but they don't have anything. They don't have nothing to propose. They have no explanations as to how things are actually being fashioned.
Indeed, indeed. All right, ready to go on?
Sure, we can go on.
Okay.
None of this stuff will be able to happen if you actually put them on the spot and say, make a prediction using evolution then on where something is headed tomorrow. that they cannot do. So what they did is they found evidence and said, see, we predicted that. We can line these bones up and show that they've evolved doing just that thing in a little bit. But go ahead, play again.
Common descent, it makes specific predictions as to how organisms should appear and when they should appear. And there are things that could falsify evolution. Now, I itself prove my point in that the assumption of common descent, trumps any assertion of common design. For creationists to justify the assertion of common design, you need to come up with some kind of objective means of distinguishing or identifying common design apart from common descent. For example, are all the members of the family Pinacea related? Or they're related to the rest of the order Pinellis? How do we distinguish common design from common descent within the class Pinopsis, and so on? So creationists have come up with several arguments they use to differentiate what is design from what is not. And I will go through a few of these arguments and show how they don't hold up. So the first argument here is apes make apes, humans make humans. This argument fails to understand that humans are apes and that apes would always produce apes according to the law of monophyly. It also misses the entire concept of evolution in that all the descendants of a clade would forever remain whatever their ancestors were, regardless of how much they've changed. At no point in evolutionary theory that it requires or permit that one organism can give birth to a fundamentally different kind of organism. So the argument is just a misunderstanding of evolution.
All right, might as well pause it.
He said implying that if they can't bring.
Okay, so basically, how do we define a kind? We've always defined a kind by something that brings forth. It's something that's that always has either been able to bring forth or continues to bring forth now. We know that things speciate, so we know that things are not able to bring forth at all times.
Okay, so he just demonstrated why his definition is broken, like, immediately, if there's an exception to it.
So what he's saying is that it's something that bring forth or could have originally bring forth or should have come an ancestor. So the question follow behind that is, how do you tell which organisms in the biosphere could have originally bring forth? How do you do that? And that's where the argument falls apart. That's exactly where it falls apart. That's why this is one of the first things I brought up as to what exactly is a kind. Let me see here. So, for example, oh, sorry.
Yeah, like, how are you going to tell common descent from common design when we know that the only criteria that they have is to bring forth, and that most often gives us a false negative because most species that have speciated can't interbreed with each other again. So it's just not reliable at all.
Right. So it seems to me that they just assume that if the organisms are similar enough, then they could have bring forth. Because usually they would say that maybe if they can graft with plants, or they would say if they can in vitro fertilize, right? Mm-hmm. But then this logic kind of falls apart when you take fossils into account, because you can't interbreed them nor in vitro fertilize them. So it's just based solely on the characteristics of the organism. They use comparative anatomy, and that's actually my fallen argument. For example, I remember when he attempted to take on the phylogeny challenge, and they did. I forget what they call it, the video, but anyway, the bunking iron raw, whatever, was they were tackling the cat, the feline clade, and what he did was in the first video, I remember him placing viveridae of viverids, that's like civet cats and so on, as being basal to felines, right? That's what he did. And then when I pointed out in the video, like maybe like an hour after they posted it, I pointed out, hey, if you add viverids, then you have to add other things such as bear cats and so on. And they suddenly removed the video and then replaced it with another one, like about an hour and a half later. And it's still up on the channel, but it's now, you can see in bracket it has updated. They removed viverids and just added, they had Purularis as being basal to all felines, However, what he did was to, on his own, arbitrarily, in Barbara-Felidae. So he added in a family. That family is not connected to Felidae. It's another, that's the saber-toothed cats and so on. So he just added them in because they look similar. And that's it. That's pretty much it. And that's how he determined what a kind was. But the thing is, why did he remove Viveridae? Because they have the same kind of body plan. They have the same. They share orphan genes. Because he said later in the video, you hear him saying that they do share orphan genes. They have Phalloidea. I think that the order would be Phalloidea. They have orphan genes. They share ERVs. What he was saying is cats usually have the same kind of coat pattern where they have either the stripes or the flecks, and they have the same stripe and flecks. They have the same kind of scent glands. So he was talking about. So they're pretty much cats in a sense, or just not called cats and not in cat family. So other than appealing to like arbitrary classifications, like what taxonomists use, what justifies him putting it into the cat kind in the first place, and then what justifies him removing it?
Mm-hmm. And RawMatt complains a lot about taxonomists changing which taxon an organism is in, and yet he's doing it just the same. And ostensibly with sort of the same method, which is comparative anatomy, but he's added on the stipulation that you cannot bridge like too far, which just isn't scientific.
Right. So there was said that there was some kind of boundary between, for some reason, but they never point out exactly where it is, and it changed from creationist to creationist because even when he added it Barbara-Felis into the cat kind, you go to Answers in Genesis, they have just Felidae as the cat kind. They didn't add it in Barbara-Felidae. So he just did his own thing. And it seems to me that's what a kind is. A kind is whatever it is to whatever creations at whatever given point.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, and I ask creations, are these the same kind? I would get varying answers from creation to create, or from group to group. So if I'm on this Facebook group, I would get this answer or whatever. And maybe if I cite answers in Genesis, so they're their own creationists. For example, Kent Hovind, for example, he's someone on the plane, and if you cite a creation, if you ask him something and then you cite a creationist source, he would just ignore the source and say he's right, and then this is what a kind is, and then that creation would say that was what a kind is. So, and all that is because they don't have a consensus on what exactly is a kind. They don't come together to agree on, okay, this is defined as a kind because so and so and so and so. It's not like that. It's just whatever the creationist thinks looks similar at the time, they classify that as a kind.
Yeah, I thought they were all about not leaning on their own personal standards, but I guess they all each have their own.
Yeah, they all each have their own thing, especially when it comes to kinds. Because when, for example, in the discussion with Bill Morgan, when I said, I asked him, did you know that corn and bamboo are in the same family? Because he said family is a kind. Okay, how do you know corn and bamboo is in the same family? He said, well, people have classified organisms, and sometimes they have different origins. They put them in the same family, but they have different origins. So he's implying that they're not related. But then RawMatt said that they're related because they're all grasses. So what is it? Are they related or not?
And how do they know?
And how do they know?
That's what I would call this is how people pretty much teach evolution today. They go, things are evolving, and they're pretty much using an example of something just arbitrarily. They'll pick at something and they'll say they're evolving, and they show some butterflies, but really kid in their imagination is actually picturing real evolution occurring, they actually think that a transition is occurring. If you look up the dictionary definition of micro and macro evolution, Emotionally Stunted started at the beginning of this debate saying that macro evolution is change of a species, but he left out that it's large scale change over time. Large-scale change, that means something like a bat evolving a wing or a mammal moving into an aquatic animal. So these are...
Why is that so hard to believe? Like, that's just getting longer fingers and like extra skin for the bat.
So, first thing
that-
I wanted to point out is that, the diagram you showed with the equivocation, where you showed like the variation in butterflies, and then you showed the evolution of, I guess, humans from fish as well.
Mhm.
That's not that's not the only evidence we present for evolution. And I would say now here that anybody who's shown the diversity, for example, peppered moth, for example, the peppered moth example, and then from that conclude that all life is related, is dumb, because that alone could not justify all that change. All right, and that's not the only thing we're presenting. That's just the only evidence there is. There are more arguments and evidence to learn. You have the picture. That's the picture there. So
Yeah.
anybody who accepts evolution based on just that, what the guy is talking about, has to be they must have been misled. So you have to, because there's much more evidence than just variation within butterfly. If, for example, not knowing about evolution, someone showed me that and said, well, because there are variations within butterflies, it therefore means that humans evolved from fish. That would not follow. Honestly, that would not follow. I would need much more evidence than that. And that's what the creationists do. They try to minimize the evidence, the actual evidence, or the actual theory, and then, try to have this cartoon characterization of it. And then they do this. That's where you get these kind of memes from. But no, it's much more than just variation within butterflies. Because, for example, I found myself shown that watermelons and pumpkins and cucumbers and zucchinis and so on, they're all related by means of they're all related, and they can graft and so on. And this is macroevolution. I also showed that tomatoes, tobacco, and eggplants, bell peppers, tobacco, and so on, they can all graft because they're all related, and that's macroevolution. So if maybe what it could have done is maybe show a more impressive example of evolution. Maybe you can even show the variation within brassica, for example, cabbage, kale, broccoli, and so on. Show something like that, and then instead of showing that all that macroevolution, to show something more subtle. So, what I would like a creationist to do is show that where I've seen that Bill Morgan and RawMatt and Stunted Emoticon, they all now accept that, because of me, accept that tomatoes, plants, bell peppers, and tobacco and so on are related. Potatoes and so on, because they're all related. They're all within the same family. What I would like them to do is take those, contrast it with hominid evolution. So maybe evolution of Australopithecus to Homo, right? And compare those two. So compare that macroevolution. They want to call it microevolution. It doesn't matter. And compare it to a more subtle example of macroevolution, like the evolution of humans from apes. And then I want them to make the argument that evolution is stupid based on that. Don't go as far as to show a human and a pine tree or whatever. Don't go as far. Just choose something more subtle, and you start from there. You show, okay, well, if this is possible, for example, if cucumbers can be related to watermelon, is it possible that Australopithecines are related to Homo? And you get it from there, but don't go too broad with it. And then from there you can, okay, Australopithecines, and then they're related to all hominids and all hominini, hominoidea, and you go on and on until you reach to all vertebrates and maybe all tetrapods, all chordates and so on. But again, where they try to compare this little butterfly thing to the entire history of mammalian evolution, that's just dishonest, to tell the truth.
Yeah, I do think the plants are really impressive as far as just demonstrating macroevolution, because you can literally see the small changes adding up to a big change. And I personally really like animals, so I look at it like, so if you can get a longer finger, if you can get more skin, why can't a similar process, why can't that incrementally happen for a tree climbing mammal to become a bat? And we see basically that happening in flying squirrels. Um, there's one species of flying squirrel that actually has an extra bone for these rudimentary wings. And I'd like to see any creationist tell me that those are not part of the squirrel kind.
Right. So yeah. So I guess in their heads they don't see the variation going beyond some imaginary boundary. They don't say what the boundary is though, and I don't think they ever will. But they I don't know because evolution is counterintuitive. I would say there are certain things that would kind of you know and how can this evolve into that But when you really check it out, it's actually a creature evolving into a man. But in reality, a man is just a modified fish. If you look closely.
Yeah, it's not from fish to man, it's from fish to sort of, well, like land fish to land fish that walks better. It's so many tiny changes adding up, and that sounds like a cop out, but really what I'm getting at is why can't, if we can observe a little change here, why can't they add up? Why can't more of those changes happen? Is there a limit to the amount of changes that can add up in one population? Is that limit just in time? Because some creationists kind of try to go down that road, but most of them I've noticed kind of they want to put their foot down on, no, it's impossible for just biological species to change on that scale with any given amount of time. And it's just hard to get them to realize, just because I can't count to 1 billion in a day, I can count to 1 to 2, 3, 4, but I can keep going. Where does that stop? Where does that stop in evolution, or what they would accept as microevolution? How many microevolutions can you have? Because as far as I can tell, every proposed fossil series is just a set of micro changes. And a lot of them are just losing features that they already have, like lizards to snakes, or the Pakicetus to whales. It's just losing hair, losing limbs, and like moving like its nostrils. It's basically, that's it. Why can't this happen? They never name the boundary. So
Large
ready to go on?
Yeah, you can go on.
occur that could prove that it would lead to macroevolutionary changes, we would expect to see that. But you see, what they do is they use this equivocation again by telling you that macroevolution means large-scale change over the time, which is not true. So they try to pin you on this. Aaron Raw did that to me. He goes, "Is macroevolution true?" It's kind of like, well, see, what he's trying to do is make me say no, so that means he can say, "See, you don't even believe in speciation." I don't believe. So see, it's just a con. It's like the word evolution. It's an umbrella term. It means many different things, multiple different things. So we're going to be talking about things that are, where are things placed. And when it comes to animals, when it comes to plants, when it comes to aquatic animals, there are differences. Aquatic species speciate much faster than land animals, and plants do the same thing. Plants can.
Did you say something?
Oh, but no, but you can pause it as you already paused. First, I wanted to say that I remember before he accused me of defining macroevolution of just being speciation. No, I define macroevolution as being changes at or above the species level. So that would include any change above the level. I can't believe I missed that because it was written clearly on the screen. And secondly, what I want to ask him personally is, what is large-scale change? Because you already accept that corn and bamboo are related.
Exactly.
Is that not large-scale change, or because you said we never show large-scale change, but you already accept large-scale change, but he didn't define it. So I want to know what he means by it. What do you mean, RawMatt, by large-scale change? And Is, for example, the variation between corn and bamboo large scale, or for example, is the variation Felidae and Viveridae large scale or small scale? So why did you remove Viveridae from Felidae? Well, why couldn't all of Phalloidea be the same kind? Is the variation within there large scale or small scale? What is large scale change? Define it. And how is it different from what you already accept within kind? I need to know that, because they're so vague on things that you can't pin them down. So anything you present is not enough. It didn't meet some kind of imaginary criteria they didn't explain to you in the first place. So what is large scale change? Define it so I know what you're looking for, and explain how is it different from what you already accept within kind. So is the variation within Cucurbitacea, that's cucumbers, watermelons, and so on, is that large scale change or small scale change? Or what about the differences between humans and apes, or Homo and Australopithecines? Is that large or small? You got to define it. Define what it is, and tell me how I can apply it. It needs to be something objective, not something that you just make up because. Yeah, so please tell us, what is large scale change? Define it for us, please. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we need some sort of objective criteria. And as far as as it seems, it's just whatever they subjectively feel is like too far of a leap. Even though we have examples of within kind variation that are larger than the differences between like what you were saying, like the basal forms and some of the others that are supposedly not related but are very similar.
Plants are extremely different, but yet they also fall within their kind. A nightshade always produces a nightshade, for example. Palms always produce more palms. They never go out of that, and you can never graft a palm onto anything else. You can't take a nightshade plant and graft a nightshade to another nightshade, or anything outside of the nightshade family, I mean. But you can always do it usually within the group, so we know what things are related. And the evolutionists, they have a bigger problem than we do. We're just trying to define what is a kind, and it's
Again, evolution says palms will always make palms too. It's just that they
And
produce slightly different palms all the time.
because he said, for example, he just arbitrarily said a nightshade always produces a nightshade, palms always produces palms. Fine, that's okay. But angiosperms always produce angiosperms. I can say the same thing, because palms and nightshades, they fit within angiosperms. So I can say the same thing he's saying. And that's exactly what evolution says, regardless. So, and that's the same thing I presented on screen. So they call this educating me, but I'm not being educated here, because this is just taxonomy. This is how phylogeny works. You forever remain whatever ancestors were. That's the exact same thing I said just a couple minutes ago. So he's just repeating what I just said. Yes, a nightshade would always produce a nightshade. A tomato would always produce a tomato. An eggplant would always produce an eggplant. I know. Teach me something, and teach me something that is contrary to what evolution is, because you're attempting to refute not only me but evolution. So what, I don't see what anything you're saying here is contradicting evolution. It is totally consistent with evolution, phylogenetics, and everything. So this is nothing new. I don't know.
Yeah,
he
and
was going on with the definition.
I'm still not
Go on.
seeing any definition for kind. He said he's struggling, or he's trying to define what a kind is. All he's come up with so far is something that that brings forth, and he debunked that himself like a second later.
Oh, he's not going to, because that's why I structured my arguments in that way, because usually creation would say a kind is what can bring forth. Then they would say a kind is what can originally bring forth. They would say, well, if you can in vitro fertilize, thing, and then I said, well, how do you classify fossils then? Because they you can't do anything with that. And because you realize that the fossils, they do it based on comparative anatomy. That's what taxonomists do. And actually, in reality, all the talk standing for true genetics, they don't actually tell you what about genetic they want to show what it is and what is not. They don't actually tell you that.
Yeah, how similar?
How
similar should they be genetically? They don't define that.
They don't define that, and for good reason. They yeah, so all the talk about genetics, they don't say exactly what. And in reality, biologists don't actually use genetics to classify kinds. They use comparative anatomy. Because you can look at what's that guy's name? Bill Morgan did a one or two videos on him. I did cite it in my thing. What's his name? He's a biologist, a creator. Get him. Let's see if I can get him. That'll be on my channel. Come on. What's his name?
Yeah,
Todd Wood. Todd Wood. You know Todd Wood?
No, I'm not up to date with all my baraminologists.
He's a creator. He's a biologist, a creationist, and they classify what he uses to delineate kinds is morphological continuity. So as long as continue a smooth continuum of traits between one organism to the next, then that would be a kind. And where there's a break, that would be a break in the kind to another kind. Because he did a video on YouTube with rabbits, for example, and nowhere did he mention anything about genetics. He also talking about the characters. So we have living rabbits, but he wasn't using any genetics. He was just using comparative morphology, comparative anatomy, and he was saying that rabbits and hares are related, but they're not related to Pika, I think, because Pika is too morphologically distant. They don't fall within because he has the kind of system he uses where a similar thing to what taxonomists use, but he's just looking for the gaps between the groups, and where the gaps come, where the species, the kind end, which is kind of strange. I would love to see them use that on dogs and, for example, brassica, for example, cabbage and so on, because they are not morphologically similar, but they are genetically similar, very genetically similar. So I want to know how he uses that on other species. So at the end of the day, they actually use comparative anatomy, not genetics, to delineate kinds. So it all comes down to what looks similar or what is similar. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. And that thing they bring up, they usually bring up about the ability to interbreed. They just say that just because they know that humans have never interbred with apes, so they just say it. The thing about they get that from the Bible too, the ability to bring forth. But I've listened to that creationist quote that passage many times, and not once could I get that the Bible was actually saying what could bring forth. All it was implying is that they would bring forth after their kind. No time I can get from that passage that the Bible was saying what can bring forth is the same kind.
Yeah, and like for example, how could they tell me their exact methodology, whether it's genetics or anatomical, or I mean, preferably both? How would they distinguish whether or not foxes and wolves and like jackals are all related or not related? Because some creationists accept this, some creationists don't, and a lot of them just flip flop between them. Are foxes and wolves related? Are even all foxes related because they all have different chromosome numbers? So what exactly? How would they tell me whether or not they're related? And they're just gonna scramble.
They just say the family. They're in the same family. They're the same kind. That is the main reason why RawMatt accepts that the corn, the bamboo, the rice, they're all related because they're all within the same family. Although they're very different, they're within the same family. So
But he says usually he accepts the family level.
Yeah, usually, except when it's an ape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Placement that we invent, and all people do. Matter of fact, taxonomy was invented by a creationist, and evolutionists haven't invented.
And it was so obvious that he put humans with the apes. He couldn't not, because it's impossible.
Yeah. Later he would say why he thinks humans are not apes, and I would deal with that later. You will come up with it just now.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Invented speciation concepts. They have over 30 of them because they can't even agree with each other. So they have much more of a problem than we do. So let's say that we're talking now about, what did he go over there? I think he mentioned taxonomy, right? So usually what I tell people with taxonomy is that
yeah.
This is another thing. Creationists seem to think that because there is no definitive, definition of a species, it's a problem for evolution. Why? Because that is actually a testament of evolution. Because there is no boundaries between species. So why would we have to make a definition that would imply a boundary? That's why the definitions are so mushy sometimes. Well, there are different definitions for different types of animals. For example, and different scenarios. So, sexually reproductive organisms would have their own definition. Asexual reproductive organism would have a definition there. There are several definitions for sexually reproductive organisms, and like fossils and so on, they would use a different definition because they are fossils. They're just still a species by the and but I don't see why us not being able to define a kind to not define a kind, but a species. We're not able to compartmentalize organisms into distinct species. Means it is evidence against evolution. I don't see it. Matter of fact, I see it as evidence of evolution in that species are so connected in that you can't get a definite definition of a species.
Yeah, it's all related. It's like trying to define like families within human lineages. You can't draw an actual straight line because it's all related.
Right. So there'll always be someone connected to that group,
But there's so much. Go ahead.
I don't see what I see is maybe a sense of projection because they know they can't define a kind, and Kent Hovind does this a lot. When you ask him to define a kind, he would say, "Well, they have about 20-something different definition of a species, and well, I'm not the one. I'm not paying. I'm not the one paying you to teach it in public schools or whatever. However he goes about the argument. So they realize that they can't define a kind, and the only way they can get out of it is saying that you can't define a species, though. That doesn't help your case. That really doesn't help your case because you're the one making they're the one making the argument that species can be, organism can be compartmentalized into distinct kinds. We are not making that argument. We are saying that everything is connected. So if we don't have a definition that can, compartmentalize objectively, then it doesn't matter because we're not arguing that they should be separated.
Yeah, that's consistent with how evolution works.
Taxonomy doesn't really answer anything. It's meant to answer something, but it's not evidence of anything. It's a made up, and so you can move placements around. You can take something out of a taxonomic tree at any time.
I mean, so did you, Matt, right? Why did you do that?
He did that when he did the classification with the felines. But the thing is, this was supposed to be an educational video. I actually mentioned that in my opening, that taxonomists makes adjustment to taxa. And I was asking, when they do that, does this constitute a change in kind? Because they do separate taxa. So does that constitute a change in kind? So I was asking that question. So I already know this happens, but for some reason he's telling me this again. This is supposed to be an educational video where I learn things.
Yeah, he's acting like he doesn't do taxonomy too. Like that's what baraminology is.
That's what baraminology is. But the thing is, in reality, taxonomy doesn't indicate relatedness. Taxonomy is just grouping organisms based on their diagnostic traits. That's it. Is when you apply cladistics, that's when you're implying the relatedness. Cladistics and phylogenies and so on. Taxonomy is just taxonomy. Raw taxonomy, you group organisms based on similar characteristics. You're not, implying that this is related to that. You just they're similar. That's it. So yes, Matt, I already know that doesn't indicate relatedness. No one is saying that because that's use taxonomy. You use cladistics. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, and in baraminology, they basically just usually copy the taxonomic ranks that we already have. They just take the phylogeny and just cut it off at arbitrary points where they don't want it to be related. Um, and yeah, like you're saying, the taxonomy isn't really the evidence of anything. It's not, we don't draw the lines and then say that's the evidence. The taxonomy is the summary of the evidence of, I mean, and these are objective criteria of what characteristics are similar. And we would like something like that from the creationists.
Thomas, they do this all the time. They will remove something and they'll add something back. So it's obviously not a fact. If something, man being placed in the ape family isn't a fact, it's just a placement where they put them. And why did they do that? Because they arbitrarily go, let's decide how much man has in common with an ape. Let's pick.
It's definitely not arbitrary. It's objective and empirical.
So from here, I know what he's going to do from here. So based on his already misunderstood version of taxonomy, he's going to make an argument based on the misunderstanding. So I wanted to play the part where he said that we smuggle humans into the family of apes based on 5 characteristics, and he can stop there, and I would explain why humans are apes.
Yeah, I think that's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't just arbitrarily pick like the characteristics. The anatomy is the same. We have the same analogous bones and stuff like that. So
pick a couple common characteristics like no tail, or a fused vertebrae, or a Y-shaped dental cavity, or a large brain, and then say, poof, now a man can fit in taxonomically with apes. They did that to smuggle people in and make them called an ape. So,
right. So what he was trying to imply is that we took only 5 commonalities and then classed humans with apes. That's it. So I guess that's how he thinks taxonomy works. So let me try to explain to him how taxonomy works, because he clearly doesn't understand it. And he would actually go on rambling on and on about taxonomy. So taxonomy, you group organisms based on their shared traits and on their diagnostic traits. A trait that is shared by every single member of the group without making any special arbitrary exceptions, right? Without making arbitrary exceptions. So, for example, apes, I'll define what an actual ape is. So an ape is any RNA, DNA, protein-based, metabolic, metazoic, nucleic, diploid, bilaterally symmetrical, endothermic, digestive, trypoblast, episcaton, gill-less deuterostome columnate with a spinal cord and 12 cranial nerves connecting to a limbic system in an enlarged cerebral cortex with a reduced olfactory region inside a jawed skull with specialized teeth, including 8 incisors, 4 canines, premolars and molars, and so on. Forward-oriented, fully enclosed optical orbits with a single temporal fenestra attached to a vertebrate skeleton, hind leg dominant. We're actually attached to a vertebrate hind leg dominant tetrapodal skeleton with a sacropelvis, clavicle, wrist and ankle bones with no tail, and having a pair of lungs, tear ducts, body-wide, reduced body-wide hair follicles, a pair of pectoral mammary glands. So it has to be glands, breasts on the chest. Opposable thumbs with keratinized dermis or keratinized skin, with flattened chitinous nails on all 5 digits and all 4 extremities, in addition to an embryonic development in an amniotic fluid leading to a placental birth and a highly social lifestyle. So that's just a summarized version of what an ape is. Now, taxonomists actually use hundreds, even thousands of characteristics, diagnostic traits, that traits shared by all the members of the group, to place to group organisms. So if you're missing these traits, if you're not by means of you have a birth defect or whatever, if naturally your natural condition means that you're missing some of the traits. That means that you're not an ape. There are other things that would group humans with apes. For example, we have a particular kind of ear. The ears we have is ape ears. We have we can apes have the ability to swivel. You can, monkeys and so on, they can't right around, like dogs, they can't swivel their arms. But apes can swivel their arms because they can swing in trees and so on. So they have that swivel ability. They tend to practice bipedal locomotion, so they can walk on two legs, and like dominant. They what else do they apes have? They you was talking about the dental, the molars. I think it's the molars. They have because of how the crests of the molars are shaped, and all apes have this. They have this kind of Y-shaped groove in the molar. All apes have that trait. So you group organisms again based on diagnostic traits, and that's traits that are shared by every member of the group without making arbitrary exceptions. So we don't want to just try to smuggle humans into apes. That's of an ape, and by defining that, I'm defining a human. So you must be an ape based on that criteria. All right. So you can't have a definition of ape and not include human in it, unless you want to change the definition of ape. Fine. If he wants to do that, fine. But according to the standard definition of an ape made by taxonomists, because again, I don't care what he says. These things are determined by people specialized in doing these things. Taxonomists, they define what an ape is. I just give a summarized version of it, and if you have those characteristics, you are an ape. Simple as that. It doesn't matter if you want to accept it or not. You're an ape. It's like trying to deny you're a mammal. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, that's pretty much it with regards to taxonomy. Yeah, he clearly doesn't understand how it's done, and he will go on ranting about one trait here, one trait or one trait there. Again, it has to be diagnostic traits, not any trait like the color of the skin. You don't class organisms just because they're green, or just because I don't know, they fly or whatever. You don't do that. It has to be diagnostic traits.
Yeah, that's a lot more than just 5 random traits there. And that's true. Humans are apes. They are classified by apes by virtue of the English language and diagnostic traits. Whether they're related to apes or not, humans are still to the other apes, but humans are still apes in the same way that penguins are birds or ostriches are birds. I'm sure that creationists don't think that hummingbirds are directly related to ostriches or penguins. Otherwise, that would demonstrate macroevolution. But they still call them all birds, just like humans are apes, no matter what. But there is the case that there is direct ancestry there as well.
I think the word ape brings I don't think it's comfortable for them to accept. It is, not everybody could accept that you're an ape or you're an animal or whatever. It's difficult for them to accept that. So because to them they're God's special creation. So I don't think calling them that to them is like an insult. So they'll do anything to fight that, or to call them a primate or whatever. They may accept that they're mammals or vertebrates. That's kind of acceptable there. It's kind of strange, but then they would deny that they're animals.
Yeah,
So
what does that even? What does mammal even mean to them? Just anything that has hair.
Anything that has hair or warm-blooded, luck and so on. Pretty much that, and they have no problem with that. Many creation would tell me that, yeah, I'm a mammal. Yeah, I'm a vertebrate. But as soon as you say you move up, say, are you animal? They say, no, I'm not animal. But all mammals fall within animalia. So are you telling me you're a mammal and not an animal at the same time? How do you draw that on a diagram?
Yeah, if they can call us mammals, why not apes? It doesn't necessarily entail direct relationship, but yeah, that is an emotional button for them.
So if you can see on my screen, if not, that's fine. This is all in our book. Traditionally, zoologists divided the subfamily of Hominia into two tribes, like the gorillanine, which is the gorilla, the chimpanzee, and the bonobos, and their extended ancestor, and then hominin, which contained humans, right? That was it. So Neanderthal, another human being, just that's all they were. So there were two groups, they were separated, and then they wanted to classify people in the lineage and smuggle them in taxonomically. So scientists decided, let's look at 5 physical groups that they share with an ape and link them together. Those were the 5 things that I told you. The U.S. Postal Department does this.
I'm sure he knows that gorillas are further genetically from chimps than humans are from chimps. Just a friendly reminder. And yeah, I was just saying, I really hope he watches this, because that is like, you just listed so many more than 5 traits. That is just such a blatant straw man that, I mean, anyone would know that intuitively, but just to have you list them all, every single one of those out there, that was like 50 of them.
Yeah, that's actually a summarized version. If you see,
yeah, that's shortened.
If you look at how taxonomists do these things. Usually, you look at a paper, and they would have, usually they don't have it in the paper itself. It would be in the supplementary articles. They would have things. Usually, it's a PDF. And when you download that file, you would see hundreds of character states they use to classify organisms, hundreds, or even thousands sometimes. And they, especially the more similar the organism, the more states, the more character states they need to use to differentiate them, because the similarity sometimes creates a kind of noise within them. So you need to, because you're not only checking the character, because here I'm just checking the character, but not only the characters they're checking the characters, the symmetries, the juxtaposition, the put, not only but how the character is shaped, how it is in relation to other things. So it's a lot. It's a lot of data they use to classify things. It's not only because, for example, I forgot to add in that we have a certain kind of heart. For example, all apes have a certain kind of heart. It's the muscles, the shape of the muscles, the bones, the shape of the bones, the way it's positioned in it's a lot. And to hear him say there's 5 characteristics, I don't know where he got that from. It's just 5. Maybe they use these 5 things. Maybe what is easy for people to recognize, or maybe you would find this on a science blog or whatever. 5 ways to distinguish.
It was some quote mine, I'm sure, where someone said those 5 characteristics, and then he went, got it, those are the only 5 characteristics they use.
Or maybe you got it from a textbook. Creationists, again, this thing with textbooks, you don't use especially high school textbooks to argue against a scientific theory, because usually high school textbooks are watered down. Everyone knows that they're watered down, because you would learn something in high school, and then to the college level or the university level, it's way different from what you learn in high school. High school is just like a primer. So you don't argue on that. So so for example, creation would argue against I remember. Do you know "Once Forgiven, Now Free"?
Sorry, who?
Have you ever heard of "Once Forgiven, Now Free"? He was a creationist YouTuber.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know yeah, so there's actually a video on my channel, one of my earlier videos. I snipped from The Living Dinosaur. So basically, he was criticizing evolution based on a high school textbook. So he apparently thinks that a high school textbook would be able to explain complex science to children. No, you won't find that there. It would be watered down. Don't do that. It's like me taking up a school textbook on creation geology, for example, and criticizing that. It's silly. I would go to the sources, go to creationist literature, and get what they say, and then criticize that.
Them together. Those were the 5 things that I told you. The U.S. Postal Department does the same thing for naming states. They pick 2 letters and link them together, like California's CA, but it used to not be. They can change them whenever they want. So they do this. So
is he really comparing taxonomy to like changing letters for convenience?
Well, yeah. Well, after he misrepresented it by misunderstanding it, then he has to argue against his own misunderstanding. He's not actually arguing against evolution here. He's not even addressing just arguing against himself. Usually creationists do this. they would make an argument on their own. No one says this, but they make it up anyway, and then they start arguing against it. So you're no longer attacking evolution here. I don't even have to answer this. I already addressed it. So you just keep going on and on and on and on. Like, man, you're not arguing against evolution. You want to argue against taxonomy, take on taxonomy. Don't make up your own shit and then argue against it. And and the thing is, both stand for truth and praise are there, and they're just taking it in. They're not questioning what he's saying. Really, do they really use 5 characteristics to classify things? And they don't question it. They just take it in because RawMatt is saying it, and I guess he's wrong. He could never be wrong, and he's always wrong. Anyway, so yeah, he's just ranting on and on. I was listening to that and was like, what is he talking about? Because that's not taxonomy. So he's just arguing with himself, pretty much.
And he's saying that people wanted to classify them as apes or trying to smuggle them into the ape kind. It's like, no, it's just that we listed out the characteristics and they fit the definition. That's how it works. It's dispassionate. No one wanted them to be apes. It's just that we share all those characteristics. And it also happens that our genetics are almost identical as well.
Why did they swindle mankind into the ape family? They do this because they just they picked something that was in common. Why didn't they go by rib count? It's not the same. Why didn't they go by brain size? It's not the same. Why didn't they go by neurons in the brain? It's not the same. What about spinal column or lumbar count? It's not the same. How about body fat? Humans have a subcutaneous layer of fat under the skin, so they didn't look at that. How about skin color? That's right. Humans have melanin. Apes don't have these different skin, or chimps don't have this. Right? How about hair growth on the top of their head?
Well, we already know that rib count, brain size, neuron, lumbar number, body fat, and skin color are all things that vary within kinds. So this isn't an argument for the separation of the kinds. And those aren't the diagnostic traits usually. And chimps absolutely have melanin in their skin, especially bonobos. Other apes have melanin. They have melanin in their hair already, and so their bodies already produce melanin. That's how you get any color to any hair or skin. And so even if it was just to evolve within kind, it's just that the skin cells produce melanin now. So that's already a trait that they have. What else was he saying? I'm sure I think I stopped him in the middle of his list, but
yeah, you're just gonna go on with one. Why didn't you use this or that or this or that? They don't use or this or that. They use all the characteristics are used. They use everything. So what he's talking about actually is placed within the thing, but only the diagnostic traits is used to define what the thing is, because you define things based on what they are, not based on what they're not. So it has to be things that all the diagnostic traits must be a trait that every member within the group shares, right? And that's how you group them. So you take a tally of all the traits, and then the definition is kind of arbitrary. So the definition ape is somewhat arbitrary. You can loosen the definition or tighten the definition, but the definition is a definition. If you want to accept the definition as is, then you are an ape. Unless you want to change the definition, it's fine. If you want to change it, then change it. But he has to be consistent with it. So so all these characters are taken into account, and then you make a grouping based on diagnostic traits, and it's not just based on one or two traits. You're just misrepresenting it. And the thing is, biomechnologists actually don't group things based on one characteristic. So what is he talking about? They do the same thing taxonomists do, although at a more mediocre version. But they don't use one trait to class living things. They use multiple traits. That's why, for example, you don't see a taxonomist putting whales and sharks together within a kind, because they know, although they have some superficial similarities, they don't use just one trait. They say, well, okay, they have streamlined bodies, let's place them within a kind. No, they use all the characteristics, and they know, well, hey, you know what, dolphins and whales are mammals, so they would at least would not class them with sharks. So yeah, again, he's not attacking taxonomy way. He's just going on his RawMatt rant, I guess.
yeah, and the groups of diagnostic traits automatically generate these nested hierarchies that somehow happen to match the fossil record. like the order that they're found in. That's a mighty heavy coincidence.
Usually, here's something you should say. Well, they predicted the same nested hierarchies. Now, that's a point. Now, anything can generate nested hierarchies. In reality, anything could actually generate nested hierarchies. Cars, trucks, whatever. What is a type of nested hierarchy you're looking for? You're looking for a mathematically consistent one where because when they do that, when you compare a human and a chimp together, when they build a phylogeny, the taxonomy would group them, and then you use cladistics to separate them. The differences is used. So you check the character state changes. What type of changes do you need to go from one to the next? So to go from humans to apes, you don't need to necessarily rearrange anything within the species. Everything is already there. Apes already have the characteristics we have. So all they have to do is just change minor, the position of bones and so on, and how to articulate themselves. That's pretty much it. But with cars and so on,
what is Neff's actual case for the fact that there's no morphological difference between apes and humans? Because, well, I mean, there isn't. He's saying that there is, that there's somehow this huge morphological difference just because they have like slightly more protruding snout and like a thicker brow. But like you're saying, we're looking at the whole skeleton. The parts are all the same. It's just a difference in the scale of the parts. And so that's just a minor morphological change that we see within kinds all the time.
Right. And that's what you see within living things, where the changes between species is minor as compared to cars and so on. You can have a car where you have, let's say you have the gas intake on the left and the next model has it on the right. That's a major change because you have to change a lot of things for that. You don't see that in living species. You don't see that. You can have a car where you have a sunroof, and then the next model you don't have a sunroof. You can have a car where the interior is made out of one material. Car in the series is made of a totally different material. For example, Volkswagen. Volkswagen used to have their engines at the back of the car, and then they brought out the new series with the engine at the front. I think they use it for more stability or whatever. But engines are now at the front. In evolution, you can't move a structure from the back of an organism to the front without transitions. But there is no transition with cars because there's no need to have one. So if you want to build, if creationists really want to build a cladogram, not the little cartoon ones they build, I see they try, but do a real cladogram where you use all the characteristics, the hundreds of traits, whatever, and you build that, and you check the amount of characters they change, the amount the characters have to change by, and you tell me if you get the same cladogram that you get with living systems. You would not get it because there are cards you can vary drastically. You can just add you can have one series of cards where you have you can just add a TV in a car, for example. In the next series, you can just add a TV, or you can add this or add that, add a new component, just like that, without need for transition to show how it got there in the first place. But with living things, just the position of the hand, bone, or whatever, we actually have transition for example, birds. You have the transition of the hand from a hand to what it is today, right? So you have that just for that simple thing, you need transitions to show that. And no biologist ever made a cladogram using a real cladogram using cars. And if they do, you would see what would happen.
Yeah, like God can just stick a part on to anything he wants, but instead it seems like his design process was limited to previous designs. Like again, the penguin, why is that limited to the morphology and anatomy of a bird when God could just put any kind of fin on it that he wanted?
Right. So it seems to me that
the fins are made from wing bones for some reason, even though no other fin in the animal kingdom is made like that.
And he could have made it out of any material, but for some reason, to me, it seems like the designer is limited to phylogeny. So if I was to accept creationism, it may be something like what Behe proposes, where the designer comes and kind of, tinkers with the design somewhat ever so often. I can accept that somewhat, but not the wholesale creation of animal kinds, because it seems like the designer is limited to phylogeny. And in reality, for example, designers are not limited to phylogeny, even when they design living things in movies and so on. So you would see, for example, in Avatar, the blue aliens, they have a sex organ on their heads, coming out from their heads. Now, if we were to find any vertebrate with a sex organ stemming from its head, as opposed to where they usually stem from, that would falsify evolution, because there's no mechanism that can move a sex organ from where it is and just place it on top of the head of a species like that. It doesn't work like that. So in Avatar, it's fine. You can do that because you're not limited to phylogeny. You're not limited. You're not confined by the limitations of biodiversity. You can design whatever you feel like. So you can design a species with sex organ at the back of its head. Fine, you can do that, but you never see that in nature, though. Let's say in Pokemon, you see Pokemon with flowering parts like Bulbasaur and Tropius. They have leaves growing out of their bodies. They're animals, but they have leaves growing out. We see that in nature. That would fall evolution.
And you can't really build any phylogeny for Pokemon. Like maybe one or two would be related, but that's what created kinds would look like. We couldn't really connect them.
That is what. And for example, even in back to Pokemon again. There is I forgot the name of the Pokemon though, but it's a monkey pretty much.
Mankey?
But it has. Is it Mankey? I think it's Mankey now, but it's a monkey-looking thing, and it has a hand on its tail, like a fully articulated hand on the tail, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is a wonderful design, because we have like lemurs and so on, and they would have these tails that they use to grasp things. Well, why not put a hand there? That would be good. That would be a perfect design to design. But it would never find that, because there's no mechanism in evolution that could evolve a fully articulated hand from a tail. But a designer can do it if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I could accept if God like guided evolution through the environment, or by, killing off whatever, he needed to get to certain bottleneck or whatever. But it doesn't appear as if anything that we know of intelligent design would look like based on the taxonomy we can build from it.
Humans are the only ones that do this. Boom, they don't want to compare that. How about facial hair that's being really long? They don't want to compare that. How about blood types? They don't want to compare that. How about the appendix? They don't want to compare that. I mean, how about sweat glands? They don't want to compare that. How about language? They don't want to compare that. How about bipedalism? Humans walk, apes don't do that. I mean, we can go down the list. They don't want to compare any of the differences. They ignore all of those. They just go by some few cherry-picked, pathetic examples that can smuggle us into there. So they like cladistics, even though it doesn't prove anything. It's just some arbitrary system they want to place the species to link man to ape. That's all it is. It's a language to call man an ape and to smuggle them in. That's all it is. So this is, if they really wanted to use taxonomy, look at how ridiculous it is to infer relationships. Again.
Well, what did he say? Monkeys don't have beards? There's plenty, or hair on their head. Apes and monkeys have hair on their head. They have beards.
I don't know where the hair argument comes from. So, it's just that we have hair growing. This is like a lion, for example. The mane. Not all cats have manes. So I don't get where the argument is going though. Where is it? Where am I supposed to take that? Some birds have small tails. Some have long tails like a peacock. Where am I supposed to go with that argument? I don't know. It's not an argument, because he's not constructing an argument. He's just saying something.
Yeah, and as far as like blood types go, you can have a different blood type within kind as well. That happens all the time, and they're compatible, and they can actually you can have two different blood types compatible with each other, and that shows how it can evolve because it's just a small change. That biochemistry is kind of plastic, so we can do that, and we see that variation. Blood type is just a small, like a protein marker on your cells.
And I can just like to take his arguments and just repeat it back to him. Just spit it back on him. Why don't you classify kinds based on those random criteria you just mentioned? And he definitely tell you that you don't do that, because obviously you don't classify things based on one trait, or you don't group things based on what they're not. You group things based on what they are. So I don't know. It's not an argument. He's just going on, and there is nothing really to respond to. I already dealt with the ape thing, and he's just going on and on and on about how taxonomy is not done, obviously. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But he's also wrong about everything he says too. It's like he said apes don't have sweat glands, and we know apes do have sweat glands. They just have less than us. So that again shows like progressive change. And they do have speech skills. They're just not as good as us. They have again, it's a spectrum of communication skills, and the ones that happen to be closest to us also seem to have the most sophisticated communication skills. Chimps can communicate in our language, at least our sign language. That's a human language, and their brains show that kind of capacity. One of the main barriers is that they just lack fine motor control in their lips and their larynx, because they have like that double gene for like extra muscles, and that's been associated with less fine motor control. What else did he say? He said bipedal. We know apes can walk bipedally, and we're just better at it. And again, that demonstrates a progression and a range of features within this family. He can't get anything right.
And I've used this, and it's also in the book. Let's say that you went to a scientist and you said, I want to prove that a skunk and a human being or a man is related. Well, the scientist would toss up their hands in the air at the phylogenetic tree, because they would say, well, they're not even on the same branch. Well, a geneticist would come along and notice that humans and skunks aren't related at all. There's 50 chromosomes and humans have 46, so they would pull them off the branch. Then an anatomist would come along and notice that skunks have body hair, and so do human beings. So they would put them back in the same branch. And then a taxonomist would remove the skunk again from the tree branch, because they're the order of carnivore, but humans are not. And then
he's acting like every specialist is going to put them in a completely different taxonomic order based on just one single anatomical feature. That's like insane. That's not
Right,
how it
so
works at all.
he doesn't get it. So he runs with, he already doesn't get it. So he just runs on, not knowing anything, and just runs on that, and he keeps going on and on and on. It's the same thing he's harping about, characterizing by one trait. You don't characterize by one trait, you characterize by all the traits. They use all the traits. And then you make groups based on diagnostic traits. So no, Matt, no one would classify things based on just the chromosome, or just the skin type, or just that, or just the hair. You don't do that. For example, you won't classify organisms just because they're green, or just because they have stripes, or just because they have fruit or whatever. No, you take all the traits into account, and then you would groups within groups. So usually that's how it's done. So you have a large group, and then you get the smaller group, but it must be done with diagnostic traits, not any old trait. Because an organism is brown, for example, or it could swim, or no, you don't do that. No one does that. That's not how taxonomy works. I hope he gets this, though. At least read the taxonomy book or something. Get to see what they do. Don't just assume they do that and then run with it, because it sounds stupid. Really, I listen to this. I'm like, who does that? Who are you talking to? He's not talking to me. obviously I won't do that. No taxonomist does this. So attack on evolution is just an attack on his own misunderstanding.
Yeah, this has never happened. Like, can he name a single instance where a single like organism was brought to these different specialists and they just characterized them with just a single trait? When has that ever happened? I don't. Does he actually believe this, or is he just like rattling on for the audience's sake because they'll believe it?
What I think is because in his how they do things, where they just do things without putting any thought or any investigation at all into things. They think everyone functions like them. They think everyone does the same thing like them. So in their own heads, maybe they think of it. I wonder how they classify things. Maybe they do just like this. And then instead of investigating how these things are done, he just goes off of this flawed assumption and then argue against it, like if he has something to say. And again, this video is supposed to be educating me, but I wasn't educated by anything here. He's not saying anything new, and most of the things he's saying it doesn't even make sense.
It's like he's equivocating, like moving like just a cat from one branch to another cat branch, and he's equivocating that to moving cat to the like the whales or the reptiles or the canines. Like, he's just making these huge jumps from these small adjustments to saying that we will just throw it wherever, whenever, just based on a single trait.
Right. So you do get adjustments in taxa. You do get adjustments, but in the first place, when they group them the first time around, they never use one character. They use all the characters. And I said, remember when I said when organisms are very similar, you need to use more characteristics to group them because the similarities would kind of cancel out each other, and then you won't know where to put what. So, for example, if you want to classify, uh, let's say you want to classify uh, humans and humans, dogs, and cats. All right, and you say, okay, I'm going to use. They have a vertebrae, they have brains, hearts. Don't get anything because all of them have that trait. All right, so then you need to go deeper down. Okay, no structure they have. Okay, cats have this kind of structure, and then you can get a tree out of that. But if you're using all of them have in common, then there is no differentiation between them. You got no tree. Um, you find that kind of moving around with species like crustaceans and so on. They move around a lot because crustaceans are very similar, very 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 similar. They all of them have the same kind of traits, so it's kind of difficult to do that. Genetics kind of help with that because character base, all crustaceans are basically the same. They have the same structure, so it's very difficult to classify them. You may be able to differentiate maybe crabs from the kind of lobsters and so on. But then when you try to classify lobsters themselves with crayfish and so on, you won't really get a good tree because they're so similar. So you have to use a lot of traits to try to get a tree out of it, and they move around a lot because they're similar. You would never get like he's implying you'd never get like a crayfish moving on over to I don't know some kind of vertebrate or something. No, you would never get that. They always move within proximity, all right, and within reason. Understandably, they would move around if you have more data. And again, no one is arbitrarily moving it around like what he says. If you have more data, let's say you have two organisms, and they look similar by all means, and then you have some genetics that show it. Oh, this is not necessarily similarity by common descent, but it seems like convergence. Then you can move them across based on that. Just like you seeing two people in public and they look alike, right? Now it's reasonable to classify them as relatives. But then if you have their genetics and realize, hey, these two people look alike just by coincidence, then okay, this person belongs here, the person belongs here. But you never put a person way off the tree and put them with cats or whatever. No, they would move within the clade. They would not move way out of the clade. As what he's trying to suggest, it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, even like within lobsters, there's like they're shorter and they look like crabs, and crabs will actually, beneath them, they have a tail that's like just folded beneath them, and it looks like a lobster tail kind of when you fold it out. And there's a thing called carcinization in the crustaceans, where a lot of them, like shrimps or lobsters that are more genetically close to the typical lobster or the typical shrimp than a typical crab, within that variation is they'll get shorter or you just more crab-like. This is a trend. It's one of the examples of convergent evolution, and it just shows the there isn't this clear boundary that they think there is. But they make special excuses for the ocean-dwelling animals a lot of the time.
Then an ethologist would come along and say, well, they're active year-round, and so are humans. So they would put them back in the same branch. And then a zoologist would come along and they say, well, they have an anal scent gland for defense. Humans don't have this, so remove them. And then a statistician would come along and notice that when they look for stats, they're just like people. So they move them back in the branch. And then a kinesiologist would come in and they would find that they have a body movement that's not similar at all to humans or skunks. So they would remove them. A homologist would come along and they'd look at the same, and they would look at newborn babies and they go, wow, they look the same. So they'd put them in the branch. Then they would look, you see where I'm going with?
I think people are just impressed by the fact that he can list off all the different specialties and like what they would focus on, but this is not how anyone ranks anything taxonomically. Again, this is just total insanity.
It's something he does. Kent Hovind does it too, where they would just list a set of random facts because they know it, and it makes them sound intelligent at the time. So they would just say, he does it a lot. All his videos, because that video they made, that 2-hour long video, just to cover half of my video, which is like 7-8 minutes, could have been cut down to about 30 minutes, because he just goes on and on saying the same thing over and over, just stating more facts as if he's adding something new. No, you don't need to explain all those facts. You explain you make an argument, you fit my argument by you make a point. That's why, for example, I was able to, in my little 15 minutes there, I actually took care of 10 arguments in 15 minutes. But he has to go on and on, harping on and on and on, trying to refute my argument. And all because he's mentioned a lot of things that are irrelevant. Irrelevant to he doesn't have to go on and on about that, and on, example after example after example. Kent Hovind does the same thing. He would be explaining something, and he would explain it, what it is, what they call it, whatever. I don't need to know that. You make your argument, make your argument. So, yeah, I guess they think they sound smart doing it, but no, you don't need to go down all that. We don't need to know all that. Just make an argument, make your argument. Simple.
With this, we can go down the list, and then you can do the same thing. It's just a placement. They want to know how they can smuggle things into different branches. But if you look at more science, it's arbitrary. It's so crazy. One thing debunks them and the other doesn't. If you use cytochrome C charts and cytochrome B charts, they both debunk each other. So they never show you cytochrome B charts. They just show you cytochrome C charts, because
how exactly is that? He doesn't explain that. Cytochrome C debunks creationism all by itself. If cytochrome C genes were created the same, then why aren't human and chimp cytochrome C sequences different from another, but all the others have mutated theirs somehow, assuming that there was common parts from a common purpose at the origin, but somehow we shared the same, we didn't mutate the same as the other ones. The only way they'd be the same is if they were created the same, but if they remain the same, all the others are different, and that means that they are either inherited recently or that they went through the exact same mutations or stopped mutating while all the other species did. That doesn't seem possible. And if the other side of the coin is if they were all created with different versions according to their kind, the problem just gets worse for them, because how would our mutations converge on the same thing? They're against convergent evolution, and they're against common inheritance. So how did they converge like that?
The
Yeah.
thing is, he said that the mysterious they don't want to show you cytochrome B charts. They only show you cytochrome 3. So the question is, how the hell did you see it in the first place? Who the hell is publishing these things? How did you get it? Why would somebody try to hide something and then publish it at the same time? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the cytochrome B diverged, so it's irrelevant to the point. That's divergent. That's branching. Exactly what evolution would predict. Some genes will conserve and others will diverge. And the fact that they're both there is only a problem for the creationists, and they just ignore that, so they don't have to deal with cytochrome C, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, do they think that all of biology is just like under a massive cover up? Like that's why they're compared to the flat Earth.
And that's what they think, that there's this kind of conspiracy going on. No, I'm not too sure what's happening in America. I don't know exactly what's happening, but I'm not aware of conspiracy where I'm from. Where geology, there is no young Earth geology being taught in the Caribbean. You get to learn Caribbean geology. There is no one talking about any conspiracy, because actually, in reality, I've never heard of a young Earth creationist until about 6 years ago, when I first joined YouTube. And I didn't really know about evolution per se. I mean, I knew about, crops and so on, but that's agriculture. But when I heard about young Earth creation, I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. What do I do with all my Caribbean history? Do I throw it out? And I looked to their websites to see if I can see anything on, how they can account for at least where I'm from. They don't have anything. Creations, because they're not structured. They don't try to. They just go from. You'd go to a creationist page, and instead of them trying to explain a region, they would just explain one, like the Grand Canyon, and they would go to explain another place and another thing. Explain to me a whole region. How did this whole region, form during the flood? Don't just cite me one location. Show me how this location relates to that location 10 miles away, and 20 miles away, and so on and so on. Explain the region for me. I want to know how the region of that area relates to that specific event. And that's what they don't do. And that's the same thing RJ was pointing out, is that creationists, they love to talk about the Grand Canyon. But if you ask them, well, okay, explain to me where you live, the geology where you live. Do you have anything on that? No, they don't have anything, because they don't do that. They just want to explain those major, geological places what, people are familiar with. It's like the Caribbean and so on, because you can get Caribbean geology on each island. Geologists can explain the entire region and how it relates to each other and so on. Creationists can't do that. All they can say, well, the flood. No, you need to explain how this island relates to that other island, what was happening to this island when this island was forming, when this thing was forming, when that thing was happening, when this. Explain stuff. Tell me stuff. Let me learn stuff. Don't just pick one part here, one part there, and then, all the parts. What was happening there? What was happening when the Grand Canyon was forming? What was happening to the rest of the, area? These things I want to know. I don't know.
And that's why the uniformitarian model is used, is because it actually, that's how we get coal, that's how we find oil, that's how we find minerals. That's, no one uses the creationist models to actually find and produce things, because it doesn't work. It doesn't explain anything. Just saying God did it doesn't tell us exactly how it happened, but predictive models can, and so they're able to do that because it's accurate.
It lines up to their phylogeny better. It's great. We play some more of the video, and then we'll hit some more of this.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an unfalsifiable systematic, like Calvinism. I mean, it's similar to that to me.
Going forward.
Any thoughts on the unfalsifiable? I mean, there's so many ways.
Praise in particular is a special one. He doesn't understand anything about biology, especially evolutionary biology. And then he's saying it's unfalsifiable. Based on the bullshit Matt just said, he concludes that. Now, you could falsify evolution, even with convergent traits. It's actually, I have a video on my channel where I take a snip from The Living Dinosaur again, where he was explaining how to formally disprove evolution. Now, you could, normally, convergent traits are either variations on the same template, or you have convergence on the same template, or you have superficial similarities, like wings, for example. Or you can have variation on the same template is like, for example, you have stripes on a dog. Some dogs have stripes, some don't, and others would have, but they didn't get it from a similar source. They got it convergently, right? But it's still a dog, so it's variation on the same template. Convergent traits that would falsify evolution is finding, for example, a compound eye on a vertebrate, or a mollusk eye on a vertebrate, or a compound eye on a mollusk, or whatever. That would falsify evolution. Or again, if you find flowering parts on an animal, on a vertebrate, that would falsify evolution too. Or feathers, an amphibian sporting feathers, or an amphibian with breasts. Those things would falsify evolution, because that's not variation on the same template, and you don't get that kind of level of convergence. You always get superficial convergence, not that kind of level of convergence. So that kind of thing would falsify evolution. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. But that's not, the creation would never provide that, because it doesn't exist. We can predict that we'd never find that. You would never find bones in vertebrates. Vertebrates don't have bones. You would never find that. And evolution predict that you would never find that. What else? You'd never find what do you never find? Let's say you find
Precambrian mammals.
Right, a Precambrian mammals. Well, that's due to placement of fossils. But he was talking about in terms of traits, but placement of fossils too. You can falsify evolution that way, and not only any Precambrian mammal, but marine mammals, any marine mammal, because they accept that marine. And with the Cambrian, they think that the Cambrian was a deep sea, because when they look at the charts of the biota that was Earth's biohistory, you see the Cambrian, but you see a deep ocean. But what they don't get in reality is that the Cambrian wasn't just it was a planet. It was a planet with continents and everything. There were continents in the Cambrian. There just wasn't any kind of complex life on it, but there were continents in the Cambrian. So you should expect trees there too, if their creation story was true, because everything was created together. But anyway, that's even if you take their strange idea of the Cambrian was just a deep sea. Where are the marine tetrapods? None. You don't find any. No turtles, nothing. I guess no turtles died before the flood and were buried in the Cambrian. All of them escaped and they swam up to be buried higher up. Nobody died before the flood, I guess. So no carcasses fall to the seafloor to be buried during flood. And they never predict that you would find anything there. They say, oh, they don't predict that. They don't predict bones in the dirt or whatever bullshit scientific truth says. But you need to predict that to explain, well, why do we see this strange arrangement of biota in the fossil record? Why don't we see things where you should expect if your hypothesis be true? Because you don't even find, for example, true crabs in the Cambrian. They come way later on. You don't even find coral reefs in the Cambrian. They're coral, but not they haven't evolved that reef thing. That hadn't started to make reefs as yet. So why wouldn't we find a coral reef in the Cambrian? That's exactly what it should be. If because coral reefs, coral don't move. They would be buried right there and then, as well as a crab would be buried there and then. Why don't we find any crab? We find you would find trilobites, but no crabs. Why no crabs though? We should, but we don't. So it's strange, and they never predict why. They never explain why, and they can't predict to find these things in the Cambrian.
Yeah, they have a different answer for each piece of evidence that you give them. So if it's by species, then they'll say it's like, well, it's differentiated by the ability to escape, or if you're asking why, like if you're talking about location, they'll say, well, the ocean's flooded first, and then the beaches flooded, and then the inlands flooded. But there's no consistency for that either. They just will use that for a specific case. And so there's no actual coherent set of criteria. It's just that they present one contradictory statement for whatever they need to do, and then they retract it for something else, and there's just no consistency.
I don't, in their heads, I don't think they say things, but I don't think they actually think about it in their heads to see what they're talking about. Maybe if someone could, um, I don't know, animate what they think happens during the flood, maybe they would see how silly it is, because I don't think they think about it. If
Yeah,
animals don't behave in the way they think they behave, they never behave that way. We have floods happen today. We have like tsunamis and so on. Animals will just go running from tsunamis, like running uphill. They just get buried by the tsunami because they don't know what a tsunami is. They won't know what a flood comes along. Like there's an animal. Okay, guys, that's a flood coming up there. We gotta run uphill. Animals don't behave like that. They run, yeah, but they don't run in one particular direction like that. No, you would animals would be buried all over the place. All right, the animals don't behave like that. No, they don't behave like that.
yeah, they can't model it. It's just these ad hoc excuses. And like what you're saying about the animal behavior is like, so two of every kind knew to go before it all happened to at the precise time to Noah's Ark, but then the rest of the species just what did they do? They waited around and just or didn't know which way to go, or
Well,
did what did they all do when they gathered? None of them ate each other.
but
It's
no,
just
what it would say is that God, that part is a miracle part. God guided them to the ark, so that part they don't have to explain that because
yeah.
well, God explained it. But what's strange is I remember Potholer pointed it out, and I too. I mean, animals for some reason they were smart enough to run a certain distance, but not smart enough to keep running. So they would just stop midway and then be buried. It's strange. Why didn't they just keep on running like everything else? And we would have dinosaurs up up in the higher layers with mammals and so on, with the later mammals. Why not?
Yeah, if different parts flooded at different times, then they could have escaped.
And it could have escaped. And that brings into question. I was talking about the eggs. Kent Hovind said that, well, the flood may have receded for a couple of months. He said weeks and months, so the animals could, I guess, lay their eggs and be buried again. And then, but the thing about eggs is they're flying right through the fossil record. So I guess that was happening many times during the flood, where the flood would recede from the land, and then the animals would come from wherever they were. Like I guess they weren't buried by the water, and then they would come and make their nests, and then they would lay their eggs, and then they would be buried again, and then they would do it again in the high layer, and then again and again and again. So this flood was something else because it does things. It's so catastrophic, so delicate at the same time. It's delicate enough to preserve footprints and so on. Very delicate. It could preserve a fully articulated nest where the eggs are intact. They're within the shape of the nest and so on. But it can carve canyons and move continents around and so on. So it's both very destructive and very delicate at the same time. But it
Yeah.
never explains how these things are happening all at once. How is it so destructive but so delicate at the same time? You never see them explain all at once.
And it always happens to sort everything in the exact order that evolution would predict for some reason.
Yeah. And all they say is, well, that's a coincidence, I guess. That's no real explanation as to why it happened. So why would a flood do this? Because to me, like the flood itself, the flood itself has some level of intelligence. Like if God is orchestrating the flood while it's happening, if they say that, then that would at least to assume that the flood is just doing that on its own. If they say that, then well, okay, then God can do anything. He may have just done that because. If they say that, then that would, to me, be more reasonable as to just assume that the flood is all natural and is doing all these supernatural things, where it does things that floods definitely don't do, where animals behave in ways they never behave.
And how did anything get to like Australia or America? Did monkeys just swim? Like a bird could fly, but where did the cats and the monkeys and everything, the tarsier. How did they get over to South America? How did they go? How did anything get over to North America? Like, did it? Where did Noah's Ark land? In Mesopotamia, and probably, but like, how did a kangaroo swim to Australia with? How did it eat on the way? How did it not get eaten by the sharks, which apparently were not affected by the flood, or I don't know. I don't know what their story on that is, because apparently some of them survived, but most of them died in the flood. I don't know.
Well, what they would usually say is that they travel across. There was apparently debris like trees and so on, and they traveled across that to reach to the other continent. That's the explanation they give. But again, what motivates an organism to travel vast distances like that for no
Yeah.
reason? You know, they should stay around the ark where the food would be. Noah had maybe seeds and so on to plant. They would stay around there and eat and eat and consume what's around there. Most of the biodiversity should have been where the ark is. You would find most of the fauna there. I don't mind birds going on and so on, but there's some animals. There's no reason for these animals to travel that far when the the kind of ecosystem that's in the Middle East is the same ecosystem they moved to. So why would they even move in the first place? Don't move. Just stay where you are because it's the same kind of environment. You don't need to travel long distances for no reason. So I guess maybe the traveling back of the organisms was also supernatural too.
And yeah, how did the plants do it too? Because they can't move.
And the plants. That was something plants of Australia and so on, because they have their own unique biosystems going on. So I guess maybe the flood, again, maybe by chance, the flood just, did that. But they don't explain it as to, they say the flood did it. Fine, you can say something did that, fine. But explain it. How it's happening, why it's happening that way. Explain yourself, give a model. And there is no model per se. There is no creation model. They just say things, but they don't explain it as to what is happening. And it happens, mate. Like, for example, I would be talking to Standing for Truth, and I'll ask him a question. Because he, for example, was talking about cold crust. He said, cold crust, creations predicted that the crust, subducted crust, would be tectonic plates I'm talking about, right?
Where did they predict that? First of all, like where is the source of that?
Well, he never cited when they predicted that, because I want to know if it's before or after they discovered it. Usually they make very ad hoc predictions, but anyways, he said it predicted that. Never gave me a citation, although I asked him for it. Never gave me a citation. Anyways, he said they predicted that. Fine, predicted that. I asked him, well, yeah, but how long does it take for these things to change? Because you just said if it was there for millions of years, it would have heated up. But I said, but why? Why would it heat up? You need to explain why. Because you need to show something that states. But in reality, these plates, millions of years to heat up, and they fit exactly with the millions of years they were there, because the temperature they're at currently, because it takes a amount of time for the big slabs of, massive, miles thick slabs of Earth would take a long time to heat up. In their heads, they're thinking because it's hot, it should heat up one time. Because they're accustomed with everyday things. You stick your finger into a fire, it gets hot, or whatever. You stick metal into whatever. These things would take a long time for heat to transfer and so on. The heat transfer would take a long time. So it's consistent with what we expect. The longer the crust is in there, the higher the temperature and so on, based on, because they have calculations and so on for how long it takes to change by a certain degree. I asked him many times, Standing for Truth, could you show me how long does it take for crust, I'm talking about tectonic plates, to change in temperature by certain. I want to know how long it takes, right? So then we can see, if this was this temperature and it's this, if it was this temperature and it's this temperature now, then it take that amount of time to change the temperature, right? That's all I wanted, and he never gives me that. Never, ever, ever gives me that. He doesn't provide me when that prediction was made, nor does he tell me how long it takes for it to change the temperature. All he says is that if it was millions of years, it would have been hot. That's not an argument.
Yeah. Show me your math. Show your work.
Show your work.
And the ocean will cool it a little bit too. And when you look at the imaging that they use, when it's subducted down there, it is melty towards the edges. It is hot, and it gets more so the deeper it gets. So, I mean, do you know how long it takes for me to just heat up one room in my house? Come on.
And
there are
these
different
things are
kinds.
miles.
Now, whilst it's easy to point out that this reasoning is complicated by things such as ring species and speciation, the logic is completely contradicted by things such as the fact that creationists classify extinct organisms into kinds. How are they doing that if they can't tell if they interbreed or not? Well, I can tell you. They use comparative anatomy, the same things taxonomists use. But isn't that the same thing creationists criticize? What a double standard on the part of the creationist. If they're in
We
the same
barely use comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy is not really anything that we're interested in looking at first, because it's the least amount of information that we can get for anything. If we have to go to the fossil record, of course, that's all we're left with. We don't have biology and genetics to pull DNA material out of a fossil to look at it. It's so we just use the exact same thing an evolutionist is doing. It's comparative anatomy. We don't draw charts out of it and say, look at this. This is totally related. We end at the very end. That's what the phylogeny challenge actually is. It's like, where does phylogeny break down? Well, it breaks down when storytelling begins. Think about it. Where does storytelling begin? Well,
Begins with the Bible. But yeah, comparative anatomy is all we have for fossils, but we also do genomics, which produces similar results as comparative anatomy. Like, they have independent lines of study that converge. It produces usually the same taxonomic ranks, the same phylogeny, based on our methods of genomic comparison and our methods of anatomical comparison. They generate the same bushes usually, with minor differences.
Let me see. So that part, he didn't actually show what I was actually showing on my slides, because I guess he was doing something, so my thing wasn't displaying. So by chance, could you go to my debate with Bill Morgan? Or it's on my channel. It's on his channel and Modern Debate. So it would be like on.
All right.
Things such as the fact that creationists classify extinct organisms into kinds. How are they doing that if they can't tell if they interbreed or not? Well, I can tell you. They use comparative anatomy, the same things taxonomists use. But isn't that the same thing creationists criticize? What a double standard on the part of the creationist.
Right, so you can pause it right.
If they're in the same.
So I gotta go back like 10 seconds. So he said that they don't use comparative anatomy, meaning that he doesn't. But that argument, I wasn't arguing necessarily against him per se. I'm arguing against the argument that creationists use, that kinds or things that can interbreed. But you can't apply that to extinct organisms, so they use comparative anatomy. But that's the same thing we use. So where I show the hominid fossils and the ceratopsian fossils. To be honest, I don't think those are different species of ceratopsians. I think that's different developmental stages. But anyway, the previous picture had different species. So they use comparative anatomy.
Yeah, how could you tell that they're even related, even if they're different ages, without comparative anatomy?
Right. So they do use comparative anatomy, and the same thing taxonomists use, but they don't apply it. They don't apply it consistently in a consistent way. So they would accept that ceratopsians are ceratopsians, even though they are way different than the differences between hominid fossils, right? But as soon as you line up some hominid fossils, oh no, they don't accept that. They would go on and on, different here, this is different there. But why didn't you do the same thing with the ceratopsian? Be consistent with whatever you're doing, okay? So if you want to, if you don't use comparative anatomy, then don't use it. But if you're using it, be consistent with it. All right, and don't tell me you don't use it when you did. You did the same thing when he did. He told me that not all crustaceans, all trilobites are related. Trilobites, they're all trilobites all at the same time. I remember him telling me that. And you don't have any trilobite DNA or whatever, so you strictly on comparative anatomy. But trilobites are so different. They have so many differences. Some of them have eyes, some don't. Some of them have they have different number of legs. They have different number of the parts you would see. They are very different, but except that all of them are related just because they're trilobites, I guess. So they do use comparative anatomy, but they use it however they want, whenever they want, and that was just a visual representation of what's happening there. With by not go on.
Yeah, it's like, where does it stop? Because we can find these similarities down the whole line there. All right. Going back to the video now.
Oh,
Back to your video.
the slides you have there. That's from the slides you got there. That's from my video.
Yeah, I got these from you.
Oh, did I send it directly to you?
You either sent them to me or I got them from one of your videos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
next
I
time
just
if
put
you
it
want
up
them,
to
I can send
show.
it directly. How they had it framed, some of the text was missing because I have citations at the bottom, and you're not seeing them there. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go back to your video then. And here we go.
To me, the same thing taxonomists used. But isn't that the same thing creationists criticized? What a double standard on the part of the creationist. If they're in the same family or whatever taxonomic rank, they're the same kind. The first question to ask is, what about any given taxonomic rank that indicates that a species...
My debates. I need to go back to RawMatt.
Oh, go back to him.
Yeah, you're on the debate.
All right. You got what you needed.
Yeah, I just wanted to show that they actually do use comparative anatomy. So I don't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
But he does. So
yeah.
Where does storytelling begin? Well, when you have to puzzle everything together and tell a story because you don't have any actual evidence. Anybody can line up anything and tell a story. Standing for Truth can line up cars and tell you a story about it. I can line up silverware and tell you a story. I mean, anything is being able to be made into a story. We want the evidence. We want biology. We want genetics. We want to know what something is. So
if a theory breaks down when storytelling begins, then their theory begins and ends at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And he's attempting to address the phylogeny challenge here, apparently, by talking about cars and silverware, which don't reproduce or vary
right.
per generation.
And the thing is, what he said phylogeny breaks down when storytelling begins, and storytelling begins when you put things together to tell a story. So he actually didn't answer anything there. He just restate the same thing he just stated. When exactly does it break down, RawMatt? We want to know exactly when it breaks down, objectively. All right. So we want to know what exactly causes legend. Now, don't just say storytelling. That's not it. Know exactly when phylogeny breaks down and how we can apply it. Pretty much. I can't. What you just said is not an argument. I don't know how to apply it. I don't even know how to address it because it's just nothing. So give us some kind of method or whatever you use that I can use too to delineate what is related from what is not. It need to be objective. It need to be something that you can use it, I can use it, a method that can be applied. All right. So that's what we're asking for. How do you apply it? It may vary from different types of organisms. That's fine, but it needs to be something that's consistent with consistent where I can use it, you can use it. All right. So that's what we're looking for. do you use to delineate kinds? An objective method. It can be a series of methods that you compile together. Fine, propose that, and let's get at it. Just saying storytelling that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, like what is the biological limitation to this? Because he's just gonna call any interpretation he doesn't like. He's just gonna call that storytelling. So, what are the exact criteria? What are the traits that? What is the methodology that he would use? Because what it looks like from here is that God deliberately limits his design process to the taxonomic nested hierarchy. And why would he do that?
What we do is we go, let's see if tomatoes are related to Lycium barbarum. We go, well, look at that. They both contain a substance called solanine. So obviously they are related to the nightshade family. So we place them together. We don't have to look through and see a fossil and just assume, well, it's the shape of a tomato, so I guess it's a tomato. I mean, that's what evolutionists do. We're not really interested in that.
So realize what he said. He said, well, let's see if tomatoes are related to whatever the species name he called. So they have one characteristic in common. They have what you said, solanine or whatever. But it's not the same thing he was criticizing before, that you can't class things based on one trait. But that's the exact same thing he did here. Let's see if they're related.
That's what he
one
does.
trait in common. That's the same thing he just did. And that's the same thing he was rambling about before. So you can see that he doesn't understand taxonomy. And then, because that's what he uses, as I was saying, because he thinks that way. He thinks other people is that way too. And then he's trying to attack it.
Yeah, you're right.
No one classifies things on one trait. He is doing that. That's what he does. And he does it again when he was talking about palm trees. Yeah, they're all related because they have the same motif. They have the same pattern of development. Yeah, they look similar. All palm trees look similar. Fine. But humans and apes have the same motif, the same developmental motif, the same body plan. So why do you really apply this thing? What is it? So it is, and that's based on one characteristic and one similarity. So that's how he does it. He does it that way. And because he thinks he does it that way, he thinks everyone else does it that way. And then he tries to criticize it only when it doesn't apply to what, only when it applies to things you don't like. Hey, I'm not going to accept it here. But it's okay when I do, pretty much.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that too. He just got done lecturing us on just doing a single taxonomic rank, and then that's his criteria for how he knows that they're related. But when it's something he doesn't like, it's not valid. And either way, it's not actually how it's done.
Yeah, do we use comparative anatomy? Sure, I'm sure some do. Especially when you go back and you look at Triceratops skulls. We go, well, that's probably the same kind. We don't have a living Triceratops to compare that to. So that's the best we can do. But as far as I'm concerned, that's not anything that we really do, especially on this channel. We've never even made a video about comparative anatomy. So onward we go.
But they need to do comparative anatomy in order to justify getting down the kinds to the point where they would fit on the arc. Like this is a vital part of explaining their theory. Like you can only fit less than 1% of the species today, so most of them would have had to have been evolved. So they have to explain this overcrowding problem, because like even being generous, like you can only fit about 1,000 pairs of like terrestrial animals. That's like cutting the numbers in half for species, like to give them the marine animals and even plants and stuff like that. And so, and that's ignoring any storage space you need for Noah's family and for food for all the animals and whatever else you need to store. So this is actually you need to justify the differences in kinds. This is central to your theory and explaining it. Otherwise, you don't have anything here.
Yeah. Well, usually with the arc, I don't like to argue about the arc. Reason being is that it's like this. It's like me trying to argue with you what Iron Man can and cannot build, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about it is, does Iron Man even exist in the first place? Is the Marvel Cinematic Universe a real universe? So why are we discussing things, like discussing the abilities of comic book characters as if they're real? So first we have to establish if the story you're talking about is real. Then we go talk about the art, right? But I don't really talk about the art because they can make up anything at any given time. The Bible is so vague on what the ark is that the creationists could just make up something on the spot. Well, they could have done this, Noah could have done that, because the Bible just gave the dimensions of the ark and that's it. It doesn't say how the mechanisms of the ark work, how they were able to feed animals or whatever. So creationists can make up anything on the fly. Well, they could have done that. They could have done. Of course, they could have done that. Of course, Tony Stark could have done this. Of course, he could have done that. Because again, you're just making shit up. No one defines what Tony Stark's limitations are when it comes to designing things. No one actually says how much wealth he has or whatever. He just can do anything. Fine, but can that actually exist in reality? Can it happen? That's the same things. It's fine. That what could happen. Fine, but
Yeah,
did it actually?
they're so concerned about not interpreting the Bible, but just taking it literally. But all of this is just the Bible doesn't say any of this. They're interpreting and making assumptions based on, well, what little information the Bible does give must be true. So I'm going to construct an explanation around that. But that's just as interpretive as anyone who's saying, well, I think that the like spiritual message behind the myth is more important than like it's not trying to tell us a zoology lesson. It's trying to tell us some other kind of like deeper spiritual lesson. And that's just as interpretive as anything the creationists do.
Family or whatever taxonomic rank, they're the same kind. Now, the first question to ask is, what about any given taxonomic rank that indicates that the species found therein is unrelated to everything else? Well, nothing. For example, what happens to the concept of kinds when taxonomists makes adjustment to taxa? For example, separate one taxa into two, combine two taxa into one, or move species between taxa.
Yeah,
Does this constitute a change in kind?
This is where you say it. I don't. These guys were watching originally, so I don't know why they forgot about this part.
Yeah, so I mentioned this, and then he was mentioning it because he watched the video beforehand before he did it. So obviously you would take a note that, hey, this guy mentioned this. It makes no sense me trying to quote unquote teach him or educate him on the same thing he just said. So I know what taxonomists do. They move species between taxa. They all those things I just showed. And then he went on to say that they do that. Tell me something new, because you're labeling a video educating me, and I'm not being educated here. So maybe change the label of the video. The label of the video is too ambitious. Change that.
Usually, creationists try to equate kinds with the taxonomic rank of family, ignoring that humans are within the family of apes. Anyways, when they do so, what I would do is to show them a large family for which they can't account for the differences, and they would arbitrarily change the ranking down to the genus, for which I would show them several genera, where the change is too much for comfort, and the creationist starts going all over the place, for which I would show them, for example, that Ken Ham, during his debate with Bill Nye, accepts that the entire order Proboscidea are the same kind. So all this goes to show is that you can't equate kind with any taxonomic ranking. You'll need to resolve that on your own.
Okay.
Often genes prove they can't be related.
He wanted to know, like, okay, he showed the grasses. Yeah, they're related. It's the grass family. Bamboo, corn, all these things are related, right? Like rice, bamboo, and corn. They're grasses. That's pretty simple. Yeah, they're in the grass family. But the grass family is easy to answer. Just like the bitter melon, water, and melon. Yeah, they're in the Cucurbitaceae family. It's a bigger family, just like we were saying, nightshade. It's the family. It doesn't have to always land on the family level. That's just usually where it lands most of the time. So we're trying to define what makes something a kind. That's it right there. That's the family. They're always going to produce that. The grasses will always make grasses, and you can tell if they're grasses because they can be grafted. You can follow wheat back. Let's say it's summer wheat goes to winter wheat, and then it goes to spell.
Did you say pause it?
No, but you can pause it. So you realize here that he accepts that bamboo and corn and rice and wheat and all those grasses, all the same kind, without question. He doesn't question it, all because they're within the same family. So he doesn't want to know about how different the genetics are, how different the morphology is, or the anatomy. That doesn't matter. They're within the same kind. I'm going to accept them. You're not going to question them. But as soon as you're not going to question how taxonomists group them in the first place. But as soon as you try that with humans and apes, all hell breaks loose, because that, I guess, as much they don't want to accept that, but has no problem accepting are related, despite how different they are. Obviously, very different. Now, I would love to challenge Matt right here to explain to me with a straight face and be real with me. How could you accept that all this change is possible? Corn, rice, bamboo, all the grasses, lawn grass, whatever, let's name it, are related. But humans, Homo, can't be related to Australopithecines. So, and I want it in one video. So you make one video where you show them side by side as well, and say, look, these are related by whatever reasons you give, but these here can't be related by whatever reasons you give. I really want to see a creationist do this. So you right. So you see the poo and corn and so on. Show that. Show a human, a hominid line up of fossils, and you show that, and tell me with a straight face how these plants can be related. It's unreasonable to assume that that Homo is related to Australopithecines. I really want to see how you would explain that, because it's strange. I don't see how you can accept that without question. But as soon as I say, oh, I think Homo is related to Australopithecine, you don't accept it.
Because the differences between these examples are larger than the differences between humans and apes.
Right, and he accepts them. Look how different. And these are things you interact with on a daily. You don't need to be an anatomist to look at a watermelon. You can buy them at the grocery, cut them open, look at them, and look at how different they are. Yes, they are similar. There are some similarities, but look at the differences between them. You can get a corn anywhere. You can get, I don't know if you're able to get rice from raw rice, but you can get bamboo, you can get any grass, whatever. And you look at them, look at the flowers, look at so on. Look how different they are, right? Look at them. You don't need to be an anatomist to you take them, cut them open, and you look at them. Look at how different they are. Look at what you actually accept. And then you look at a series of hominid fossils line up, and you tell me you don't see that relatedness there. It's mind-boggling to see that.
Yeah, they have, and despite all that, they have analogous parts that are basically the main difference is just scale. But
Right.
the different combinations of how you can scale up or down or enhance or just put emphasis on one feature versus the other in this branching, spreading manner creates these wide differences.
It's unbelievable, because he said he accepted that later on he already accepted with the nightshades. So he accepted that tomatoes and bell peppers and so on and eggplants are related because they're within the same. No differences. He doesn't care. One's in the same family. Tobacco are within the same family as tomatoes. Potatoes too. Some more. The difference is just the roots. Potatoes also have the berries, like they look like tomatoes. But they can be grafted. You can graft tomatoes and bell peppers and so on. They can be grafted. But look at the differences. You can get a bell pepper at the grocery store, get a tomato, get a eggplant, cut them open, cut them up. Look at the differences you're accepting, and look at the differences you're denying. And you tell me if it's reasonable to accept what you just accepted, but deny what you deny. You know, that's what I want to know. You got to be real with yourself. Be real with me. Explain to me why is it reasonable to accept all this change, but somehow unreasonable to accept the little differences, the minor differences between Homo and Australopithecus.
Yeah, that's literally the central thing that interests me in this creationism evolution debate is literally what you were just describing. It was, why do you accept this kind of change but not this? I'm just like very almost autistically obsessed with this point because it's so obvious to me, because of the range of change that they'll are willing to accept versus the double standards that they'll apply to the range that they don't want to accept is just, and it's just interesting as biology itself too. And so yeah, that's just my main motivation, is to try and explore that rift. And man, it's frustrating.
And personally, I think I have stretched the boundaries of what creationists would accept. With those examples, because I dig hard for them, and I say, you know what, I want to see how far creationists would go, because, for example, onions and garlics, well, that's the same genus, right? Um, they're related, and you ask the creationists on the fly, hey, you know, do you accept that onions are related to garlics? And they would tell you no, because they look different. But then when you explain to them, well, this is a genus, and they're within the same genus actually, and they can cross pollinate and change it. They say, oh, I didn't know they can cross pollinate. Well, yeah, they're related because now they can cross pollinate. When you show them that, you ask them, do you accept that? Because I literally asked creationists on Facebook. I would ask the question after, do you accept that watermelon is related to pumpkins and cucumbers and so on? And they said, no, that's different kind. The pumpkin kind, the watermelon kind, whatever. Okay, fine. Do you know that they can graft and cross-pollinate and so on? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, well, yeah, I think they're related now. You know? So the difference the difference is they have no problem with it, as long as they can interbreed or graft or whatever. So I think by doing this, I push the boundaries of what creationists accept by doing that, because usually when you show them things, it's, you know, things that they would recognize as the same kind, like cats and knives and so on. They're recognizably similar. But with the plants, they're not recognizable. No one would just on the fly say an onion and a garlic is related. No one does that unless you actually look at it, you study it properly, and say, you know what, hey, actually they are related. They look different, but they're the same. Just modified onion. That's what they are. Yeah. So I think what I would do is to use that and press it against them and say, well, how could you accept all this, but then tell me that this is unreasonable? You're not being reasonable here. Like,
Yeah, and their methods usually lead to false negatives where they'll assume that these things are not related, and then you'll give them more information and they will be related, but they won't amend their model at all.
Belt, and then it
they
goes
want
to kamut, and then it goes to emmer. That's the original grain. It's emmer, and nothing compares to it today. They're all genetically inferior. Same thing with tomatoes. A little cherry tomato is trash. It wouldn't even live without your help. Just like a banana, a 25-mile an hour wind.
Almost as if they're adapted to being taken care of by humans. Like he doesn't even understand.
Artificial. That's a consequence of artificial selection. They're going to go down the road of genetic entropy in a while, but you notice that they never. Every example of genetic entropy they give is things that is already expected under evolution, and I know the Standard for Truth did that with you in a debate. The interchanges between you need to pin him down on. For example, when they talk about Minsky's experiment, right?
Seems like
talk
you're
about.
getting a little bit of interference right now.
Oh, is it still there?
Uh, it sounds okay now. Try it.
Okay. So he would interchange between different types of genetic entropy because apparently there are different types. There is loss of fitness. There's loss of information, reduced genome size, whatever. Even reduction in size is genetic entropy. Anything apparently is genetic entropy. Even change in specificity. So if you, for example, you change a fin into a leg, and you lose the ability to, use it as a fin, that's genetic entropy too, because you lost the specificity of it. What it could have originally done. You could originally swim with it. Now you can't swim with it anymore, so you lose the ability to swim, and that's genetic entropy. Everything is genetic entropy, right? But there are different types, and they interchange between it on the fly. So with Lenzy's experiment, Stanley should talk about the loss of genome size, right? But he doesn't mention the loss of fitness because they didn't lose any fitness. All the populations gain fitness in every new population thing. What they will talk about is the loss of specificity. They won't mention loss of fitness there. And all they will do is mention loss of genome size and loss of specificity, where they had the ability to live in this environment before, they adapt to a new environment, and they can't move back to the old environment. They can't perform as well in the old environment. And they say, well, because of this, macroevolution can occur. But that's exactly how it happens on the macro scale. When organisms transition from one type to another, they don't have to be equally adapted to the old environment anymore. So when, for example, when whales evolved from terrestrial lifestyles to aquatic lifestyles, why didn't have to be equally adapted to the terrestrial lifestyle? They adapted to the lifestyle, so they don't need to be adapted to the old lifestyle. So exactly the same thing they say is evidence against macroevolution. It's exactly how macroevolution works. You lose parts that you don't need. You the landscape of bacteria is reducing genome size because they don't need the extra baggage of DNA, so they throw it out. That's what bacteria do. So bacteria, especially when they're in closed environments and in those symbiotic environments, like bacteria within your mitochondrial bacteria, they would have extremely small genome size because they throw off the genes and so on they don't need. Right? Not to say they're losing fitness. They're not losing any fitness. He doesn't mention fitness there. But all they would mention is that they lose genome size. Yes, they lose genome size because of the environment they're in. Why don't you take your same methods and apply to wild bacteria? He never does it.
Well, they also have this idea of like universal fitness, as if like because they're more adapted to this laboratory setting than the wild environment they were taken from, that somehow their overall fitness went down. Well, no, their fitness for this environment went up, which is exactly what evolution is. And if you put them back in the old environment, they're now adapted to a new environment. So we would expect that. It's like, but there is no universal fitness. A whale is going to die on land, even though let's take a killer whale. It's the apex predator of the entire ocean, but it's going to die in a couple hours if you put it in the territory of like up in the mountains somewhere where some other animal is going to be way more fit, but it's going to drown in the middle of the ocean.
Right. So
Blowing over
yeah.
a
So
banana crop will.
Go ahead.
yeah. I was saying that they don't get it. They don't. I don't think they get how evolution works. That universal fitness. That's what they think evolution is. That you would get bigger, better, faster, stronger, and you just get more and more and more and more improved. That's
In
not how
all
evolution.
ways.
In all ways, you adapt to your environment. You use what you need, and usually a change would come at a cost because that's how it works. You want to develop armor. You usually you would give up your agility. So usually not so agile, and agile creatures are not so armored, right? So you get that's how it is, even on the macro scale. So I don't see why they say, oh, this happens on the micro scale, and it disproves macroevolution. When that's exactly how it happens on a macro scale too. You gain, you lose, you develop a new trait, you lose an old one. That's how it goes.
Yeah. Oh, do you see SFT is actually having a debate with Tom Jump right now about creationism making testable predictions. I'm sure
Yeah, I
Tom is
think
doing well.
they already had that one. So I think there should be a premiere.
Oh, okay. It says it's live.
Yeah, but it's gonna be live. I think it's a
Anyway,
live premiere.
that's
Who's showing
elsewhere.
that? Okay.
Yeah. We'll tackle that one day, maybe.
Destroy it. They are genetically weak. They're all from a single clone, meaning that one disease will completely wipe them out. But you go back to the heirloom banana and it still exists. They're very strong. They're very hardy. They're pest resistant. They're really, really strong. And that's what heirlooms are. They're stronger plants.
But you guys think everything came from a single pair. Like, how is that? He's saying that this is what makes everything genetically weak, but somehow everything that came from the massive bottleneck of the ark is just going to be genetically strong for some reason.
Well, what they say, they have again, it's a miracle they're proposing. What they say is that God made them genetic differences. So apparently they hadn't accumulated enough deleterious mutations as yet. So they would not be affected by inbreeding and so on. That's it. But it all boils down to magic at the end. God did it that way.
Yep.
Just like human beings were. They were better in the beginning. They're weaker now. Same concept applies. So then people start going, well, they're so weak that they can't survive. Let's hybridize them. Let's cross them with different things so they can grow in the winter, and then we can have food then. That's why hybridization and genetically modified foods got so popular, because they were able to modify certain weak genetics out of a plant. But they can't do that on their own. These plants can't do it. So that's why genetically modified food, what Dr. John Sanford does.
Well, I mean, doesn't hybridization show you evolution? And we do witness animals and organisms of all kind getting rid of superfluous genes all the time, or bad genes. That's easy to explain.
Does for a living was able to do. He was able to manipulate plants so that they can grow in arid places like in Africa where they can normally never grow. So we're talking about families. We want to describe like what would make something in the family. Well, can they be crossed? Can they be bred? Can they be hybridized? Can they be grafted? Those are usually great telltale signs if something is in that classification.
Usually, he says usually because he wants it to be loose for whatever purposes.
Right. It needs to be loose.
So it's always so vague.
But then again, because they talk about taxonomy. They talk about taxonomy, but shouldn't be anything that is linked to taxonomy. Kind should be something on its own. Taxonomy is arbitrary. Taxonomists can change whatever they want to change. As he said, if they want, they can loosen the definition a bit and add more species within a clade, or they can join clades together or whatever. That happens. So kinds is not that. Kinds is a fixed group that is unrelated to everything else. So it should be treated as that, where you have a method to distinguish kinds, where it's not dependent on taxonomy. You have your own thing going on, right? They don't even have to use phylogeny if they want. You just use your own thing, but it has to be objective, an objective method where you can apply it and I can apply it too and get the same result. Pretty much that is the phylogeny challenge right there.
And bananas are a huge threat. They're on their way out. The only thing that makes them strong enough to survive is the fact that they're everywhere. They're in Africa, they're in South America, they're in North America. So that way, if there's a blight and it comes along and it kills all the bananas, they won't go extinct.
A blight? Well, isn't he wasn't he just saying that they were all genetically compromised? But then he talks about hybrids that are genetically superior, and I don't know. Make up your mind.
Yeah, he
So
does
they've
going
tried
on
to make
the
banana
random facts route.
What's that?
That's why he just goes on explaining random facts. He knows about them, so he's going to explain them. That's pretty much what he does.
Yeah.
crops very diverse and move them around. They go right over that. So I mean, that's never that's never good. But we have a lot of plants like that today. They just hybridize too much. They went a little too far with hybridization and genetically modified foods, and we don't really know the repercussion of what that's going to be. And but that's another subject. So that's not something to really delve into too much on this one. We'll just get more into oh, he mentioned orphan genes, or he was getting into orphan genes. Well, I go ahead and play it, and then I'll talk on the orphan genes because I answered that as well.
Well, and I wanted to mention, like, speaking of grafting, there have been experiments and like medical cases where they've grafted baboon hearts into humans, and what else was it? I think they did pig hearts into baboons, and there wasn't any like tissue rejection. Like most of the patients died because the heart just wasn't big enough, or in the case of the baboons, the pig heart was too big for their chest. So it's just like there was no tissue rejection. So they are compatible. It's just like the size of the thing, which is creationists admit can change within the kinds. And even within humans, there is tissue rejection. So that's actually not a way to distinguish at all. That's going to give you false results under the creationist model too.
Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, because they do accept that, because he said that for example with cheetahs, he said they can graft cheetah skins, and he said they can graft different felines, graft them together, and that's evidence that they're related. So it would be nice for him to apply that across the board when you graft, for example, as you said, a pig's heart with a human, if that would mean that we're related to pigs now.
Yeah, if they're even compatible, then therefore they're related.
Now, putting aside the fact that biologists actually know where orphan genes come from, this argument is falsified, is contradicted by what creationists already accept. For example, here we have a genus of fruit flies within the same kind, mind you, where some species can have dozens or even hundreds of orphan genes not shared by any other member within the same genus. So here we have related organisms not sharing orphan genes. Furthermore, although it's true that humans have genes not shared by any other apes, both humans and chimps share 1,300 ape-specific genes not found in any other primate.
okay, wait.
So I'm yet to hear a creationist come up with a cogent argument.
I'll answer the first one because it's splitting off into two different things. We'll go to the fruit fly. All right, the fruit fly explanation that he gave on we can't use orphan genes to determine a lineage specific thing because of orphan genes. Well, the fruit fly explanation is actually, if you read through the study, you see that the fruit flies were bred to lose orphan genes. They took females that were not even of the age to reproduce, and what they did is they made them reproduce. They forced them to reproduce constantly at a very young age, continuously, over and after generation after
Well, if they could reproduce, wouldn't you say that they're of an age to reproduce? Like biologists aren't just gonna like wait around a little longer just because they want to simulate like their preferences in the wild. If they can reproduce, they're gonna make them reproduce because like these are model animals. This is what we do. We like try and get them to reproduce quickly, and it doesn't really interfere with the results as far as anyone's aware.
But it's not actually the objection I had, because the objection I actually had is that what he's talking about is not in the paper. I showed on the screen, if you can see the diagram I showed with the flies, is the Drosophila obscura group. Now that clade is 30 million years old. If you look at the phylogeny, and it's in the paper, in the same paper that I quoted, they have a phylogeny with it, and they reference a paper shows that the clade, that the group was derived 30 million years ago, that the common ancestor was 30 million years ago. And then you come up further up, about 50 million years, you get another split, So the group was not derived in a lab. So I don't know where you got that from, that they were derived in a lab in the first place. No, this wasn't derived. It's like arguing that, I don't know, like all felines were derived in a lab. No, they were not derived in a lab. That's I don't know where he got that from, because it's nowhere in the paper. He said the paper said that. That's not in the paper. You can read the paper yourself. Nowhere in the paper said that. All they were doing is checking orphan genes and losses. He says that they bred them to lose orphan genes. No, they were gaining and losing. You can see in the diagram itself, it shows, I think the blue would show how much they gained, and the red would show how much they lost across the lineage. So they were not only losing, they were gaining and losing orphan genes. So that's why I picked that, because I know that orphan genes can be added, and they're within the same kind and so on. So his whole argument there is not actually just in the paper. He's saying something else. He didn't cite something. He's not quoting a paper. I don't know where he's getting that from, that the Drosophila obscura group was derived in a laboratory setting. An entire genus of flies was made in a laboratory. No, that didn't happen. And no, they didn't breed them to gain and lose orphan genes or whatever. No, it didn't happen that way. I don't know where he's getting that from. I couldn't find it anywhere. I could find things on the human ape thing, because he was quoting from the paper. But that part, he was just making shit up on the fly.
Yeah, they observed new orphan genes arising. I think the closest he can get to this would be the fact that it says that most of the orphan genes died out quickly, so they arose de novo, but then they lost them quickly. But we're still seeing them. We're still seeing new orphan genes pop up in real time, just by breeding them. We're not like mutate or like putting mutagens in their food. We're not subjecting them to radiation. We're not.
The experiment was not breeding flies to gain and lose orphan genes. They were just sequencing the genomes as they are. They weren't. Yeah. What he's saying is not similar to what happened in the, because I had to go over the paper again. I said, did I miss something that RawMatt has in the paper? But realized that he wasn't quoting anything now. He was just talking shit. So I realized that, he was just talking shit. No, the paper never implied that the group was derived by means of artificial selection. They were forced breeding them. Nothing in the paper says that relates to that at all. So they were just sequencing the genomes of these different species of fruit flies within the genus. And the genus is an old genus. The common ancestor was millions of years ago.
And Matt has claimed before that duplications are so rare that they almost never happen, and several duplications were witnessed within this experiment, just this one. So, and his math is wrong. When I forget exactly what he was saying, but it was like way more likely when you actually factor in how many children each species will have. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I want him to cite. I would ask if you just cite me that paper, or quote me in the paper that where it indicates that the group was derived by means of the group and their orphan genes were derived by means of artificial selection. I really would love to see anywhere that implies that, because the paper never implied that. I have to read the whole thing again. So please quote me that, and yeah.
Yeah, it's every time I look into what they're citing, it's just they're completely misrepresenting what is even in the paper, without fail, every single time. And that is no exception. So let's get back into it.
After generation, they finally stopped producing orphan genes. So that's what happened. It happened in a laboratory. Of course, this wouldn't really happen in nature. So when you breed these things out and then say, see, they don't have orphan genes, you can't classify them as the same kind now. Well, that's just ridiculous. Just because they forced something to happen in a laboratory is not indicative to being able to determine now that orphan genes are now irrelevant because they forced this in a laboratory somewhere. You see,
It's like he's implying that if it happens at a lab, it's somehow not valid.
Yeah, he's implying that too. But again, that whole argument he's making there, it doesn't apply to what I cited, because it's not talking about what I cited. That's why he doesn't quote anything here. But he quotes in the next, for the next argument, he does make a quote. So he's getting it from a paper, but it does misquote it. I will show that.
see what he did? He showed fruit flies, and then he said, well, they don't share the orphan genes, so they're absent of orphan genes, and then they can't be trusted as showing lineage. Well, it's a ridiculous thing. So next one, he's getting into the human and chimp right now. He just started talking.
Did you want to expand on that before he moves on?
Well, yeah, well, that's why I showed the. He was correct. I'm showing that. I want him to provide an argument, a cogent one, as to how they use orphan genes to indicate what is related from what is not. Because they think orphan genes is kind specific. No, orphan genes is lineage specific. It's specific to the lineage. That's it. So a species would have their own orphan genes. A genus would have their own orphan genes. Family orphan genes. Order, and so on, because it's lineage specific. So each species within the kind would have their own orphan genes. So how are you using them to distinguish what is related from what is not? Are you saying that animals within the kind are not related, or how are you using it? Because I've shown that related organisms with a fruit fly, they are related, and they accept it, but they have orphan genes, hundreds of orphan genes that they don't share. But yet they would say that when you don't share orphan genes, you're not related. And then I showed that the next one he's going to talk about the apes. I showed that humans and chimps share ape-specific genes. They have a lot of ape-specific genes. So are they related or not? Because yes, humans have their own human-specific genes, and chimps have their own genes. But then chimps and humans share their own genes that no other primate share, and then all primates have genes that no other, mammals share, and mammals have their own genes that no other tetrapod share, and so on. That's how it is, because orphan genes are lineage. I don't know how they use it. They don't say. They have to provide a method as to how you use orphan genes to indicate what is related from what is not. That's pretty much it.
About that, and I answered that one right here. So if you guys are able to read along, if not, I can make it larger. But what I talk about is regarding the orphan genes shared by humans and chimps. When they looked close at humans, they noticed that 1,029 human specific transcripts, and the chimpanzee had 1,307. So they said 614 were human and 916 were chimp only. So they assumed that the 221 genes that weren't there were shared. So now we have to account for why are 221 genes shared between chimps and humans if we're not of the same kind, right? Why in the world would we be sharing these if these are lineage specific? So this is easily answered. They ruin themselves right here. They directly state in this study, I'll give it right here. Why not? There you go, praise. To give to everybody. What the hell is that? Here we go. So they directly state in the study, 8 de novo genes from the human and chimpanzee matched annotated protein coding genes. So they are shared between the two, according to them, and this is their best evidence. Now, before I move on and I tell you why that this is not true, they tend to have a simple structure. This is orphan genes I'm talking about now. They're very small. They have a short protein size of only 52 amino acids long, and they're more A and T rich than conserved annotated genes. And they are preferably expressed in one tissue. For example, there's 52 orphan genes in a brain. So orphan genes are found in specific areas.
He's saying that they're too long to be orphan genes.
So there's a lot of shit going on just in that little segment there. So first off, he said that let me see. So what he was saying is that, well, first of all, let me just correct my error. Now, when I was talking in the video, but I showed it on screen anyway. So I said that what I mistakenly said that both humans and chimps share 1,308 specific genes. Right? That's what I said in the video. But what I should have said was, of the 1,308 specific genes, humans have 604 and chimps have 960. Now I didn't say it that way, but it is displayed on screen. But for some reason, maybe during the heat of the debate, I didn't say it that way. So anyway, that was he would have addressed that, but he went on something else. So what he first said was that the only what he was trying to say that the paper said that they were, first off, he said they only shared 221 genes, right? No, that's not the case. What the paper was saying is that let me see what the paper was. So the paper was saying that about 1/3 of them, 221 genes, were reference transcripts, both in both species, and the rest were identified via complete transcriptome assemblies, and express sequence tags and so on. So what it was saying is that 221 of them were identified due to what they because they already have the data for that, they were able to identify. They identified them based. They had to sequence more of the genome to find them. Right? They have because that's what they well, you know how it is. They sequence the genome. They may sequence the whole thing, but they sequence part of the genome and they would have the database there. Based on what they already had, they found 221, and then the rest of them, they had to manually find it themselves. No, it was wrong on the 221. Then you realize that he moved from the 221 he mentioned to 8. Why did he do that? So in the paper, they said that there were 8 annotated genes. Now, for some reason, to me, he's saying it as if annotated genes is a type of gene. Annotated genes are annotated genes. It's in the name. They're just genes where you know the function and it's noted. That's pretty much it. So there were 8 of them. There were not 8 orphan genes in all. There were, again, the paper mentioned that there were 1,308 specific genes, but there are only 8 of them. They see the function for. So that's an annotated gene. It's not a type of gene. It's just genes that you know about. You know the function. You studied it, and so on. Right. So I don't know what he was talking to. You jump from one argument to the next, and let me see what he said here. Right. So, well, he didn't reach to the rest of it as yet. Oh, when he said that they were only 52 amino acids long, he said only. No, he said it here. I thought it was a slip up because I slip up too. So I went to his book to see, well, where is he getting this specific number? Why would orphan genes have a specific number of amino acids? And I went to the book, and the book said the same thing. I said, why would he say that they only have 52 amino acids? And then I looked again, and that's not what the book says. The paper said that the median number is 52 amino acids. That's not saying that they only have 52 amino acids. It's saying that the median is 52. Some are longer, some are shorter. So that whole argument there is a non-argument because he's not quoting paper correctly. He's pretty much making shit up. I don't think he understands the paper. So especially the part when he was talking about the length of the orphan gene. Why would an orphan gene be a specific length? Why are genes being a specific length? That's the part I was strange. And he missed it. And the reason why he's saying it wrong here is because he's getting it directly from the book where he already had it wrong to begin with. So all the bullshit he's talking there, he's referencing himself where he already got it wrong to begin. So just if you go to the book, it's very hard to read. It's a very incoherent book. But anyhow, you go to the book and you look that paragraph up and you realize, you compare it side by side with the paper. He adds stuff in, he takes stuff out of the paper. He just does what he wants. For example, let me get a quote for the paper. Let me see. So in the paper, and he was talking about the same. I don't think he mentions it on screen, but he mentions it in the paper. In the paper, he quoted them saying, if the orphan genes present, if the orphan genes represent valid human protein coding genes, it would be concluded that the vast majority of orphans were born after the divergence from chimpanzee and could not be shared, right? So, nice. What the paper actually said was, if the orphans represent valid human protein coding genes, it would be concluded that the majority of orphans were born after the divergence. So the difference is he added in the last part of the sentence. He said, and could not be shared. The paper never said that. He put that in. So, and then the paper followed up with another paragraph here. After yes, you cut the paragraph short. What they were saying is that we reject such a model as wholly implausible. We thus conclude that the vast majority of orphans are simply random occurring ORFs that do not represent protein coding genes. So they said that the vast majority of them do not represent protein coding genes. So he quote mined the paper. Then he added in his little snippet there. And then he put it in the book. Why didn't he just quote the entire paragraph? I don't know. Why is he leaving out that part? That's the central part where they say, well, they started it with an if, right? They said, if orphan genes represent human protein coding genes, it will be concluded that the vast majority of orphans were born after the divergence, right? And then they said if, right? But then they, right in the same paragraph there, they said, well, we reject such a model as wholly implausible. We thus conclude that the vast majority of orphans that do not represent protein coding, they reject the same thing they just proposed because they were just presenting a what if scenario. If it was so, then that would happen. But we reject that because that's not the case. Let me see. And he even said in the next paragraph, they said, whereas the vast majority of well-studied genes have been directly shown to encode a protein, articles reporting experimental evidence of an encoded protein in vivo for only 12 of the 1,177 orphans. And some of these reports are equivocal, with the short table number. The experimental equivocal, the experimental evidence is thus consistent with our conclusion that the vast majority of non-conserved orphan genes are not protein coding. So pretty much they're saying that it's not protein coding. They said it before. They said if it was so, then this would happen. But we reject that, and they give evidence for why they reject that. He left all that out to quote mine the paper and then added in his own little tidbit at the end of the sentence. That's extremely dishonest. Trust me. And that whole thing invalidates his entire argument. And if you realize it, it's actually not addressing my argument here anymore. Because I'm arguing against I'm arguing for the orphan genes that are shared between the ape-specific orphan genes. The 600, let me get the numbers correct. I was talking about the 604 orphan genes that's found in humans, and the 916 ape orphan genes that's found in chimps. That's my argument. He went on a tangent talking about the 221 that he took out of context, the 8 annotated genes, which I don't think what annotated genes are, and he just quote mine in the paper and misrepresenting it. So, yeah, trust me, I'm not pleased with that kind of tactic he's doing there, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and this is a typical type of, if you can call it, research that creationists do, and they wonder why people don't read their books or like look into their side of the story is because every time you cite something, you're just twisting it. And so you get that reputation, and we know what you're going to do without fail every time. It's totally misinterpreted.
Totally misinterpreted. And they tend to be correlated to only one aspect for that. Now, why that's important is this. This is why the study said de novo genes were not enriched by bidirectional parameters in respect to the rest of the genes, indicating that this is not a predominant mechanism for de novo formation, leading to orphan genes that they had expected. So they didn't even expect this. So when you investigate these 8, it's not.
Well, that's why we do experiments, Matt. Is because we can't expect everything, or else we'd already be gods.
A simple gene structure, nor are the proteins short. So they contradicted by what orphan genes are, and said that these are orphan genes.
What'd you say?
All right. So let me see if I can get back up that page. That party actually too. So he added his own little bit at the end. So this is what RawMatt said. He said, at least this is what I'm reading from his book. But I don't want to read the entire thing. Okay. So he says in the book, here's what he says. Reading from the book. So I'm quoting from the book. He says, de novo genes were not enriched by. Sorry, I just want to get it over. So de novo genes were not enriched in bidirectional promoters with respect to the rest of the genes, indicating that this is not a predominant mechanism for de novo gene formation leading to orphan genes, which they had expected. And what the paper actually said is, however, and we start with however, our genes were not enriched in bidirectional with respect to the rest of genes, indicating that this is not a predominant mechanism for de novo gene formation. So what the paper is actually talking about is that there are, I want to grab the paper here. Yes, again. Sorry about that. It's kind of freezing.
Oh,
let's get it. So let me just get loaded up here. But basically, the paper was talking about a type of. They were talking about a type of mechanism of formation. They were saying that based on the studies, it seemed like this is not the predominant method of orphan gene. That's it. They never said that they expected it. They checked it out and they realized that hey, this one is not a predominant method of producing orphans. That's it. They didn't say that I expected. He put that in the quote in the paper itself. He just put no one expected that. He just put that in, and let me see if I can get it. All right, I think I lost the actual paragraph. But basically, we're talking about a mechanism of de novo gene formation, and they were saying that based on these measurements, it seems like this is not. It does do it, but it's not a predominant one. And there are other mechanisms, of course. So you didn't mention why they said that, and they clearly said. But I don't know why he's doing that. Why would you just quote the paper like that? Just quote the paper as it is, and make the argument as the paper says. So let me see. The pages are freezing up, so I can't really get.
Well, if he just quotes it as is, he can't spin
I want to
the
get
story he
exactly
wants to.
the name of the mechanism, but the papers are just the pages are freezing up. I can't move them.
Are they still frozen from before? Well, we can go back or whatever. Do you want to play it a little bit and see if they unfreeze?
Yeah. So you can go back to the video and you can continue.
Yeah, because I think he'll be on this topic for a little bit.
So they contradicted by what orphan genes
Right.
are,
So he has
that
some
these are
quote
orphan
minors and
genes when they're
added
actually
little
not.
clips at the end and whatever. Stop doing that, Matt. Let me see this still frozen. Let me see. Still spinning.
For
So I'm
example,
running
this one, the
the Streamlabs.
GPSR.
Oh, sorry, what?
Yeah, you can play.
Okay.
CR1 gene encodes for 137 amino acid long protein. And here's the link to that. It's all in our book. I should be linking that anyway. But also,
He's saying that that's too long to be an orphan gene, like as if. So he's saying that that's a too large a
he
protein.
thinks they contradicted
and,
themselves.
137.
That orphan genes two amino acids long.
Yeah, he just made that up, and like even like if you
So
look at
he's
the
thinking that the
median
paper
size.
contradicted itself because he thinks that
Yeah, like the like what typically a median protein size would be like something around 400 or 500 amino acids, and there's like some are up to 27,000 amino acids long. So 137 is a small gene, like by all definitions. And like the original definition of an orphan gene had like a length of 100 amino acids, so that's twice of what he thinks it is. For some reason, I don't know where he pulls these contradictions out of nowhere.
I'll do it at the end. So if you notice, these genes, when they mutate, they actually cause disease.
Right.
An orphan gene is
based
supposed to
on-
be a dead gene that doesn't do anything.
Well, and a lot of them are just non-coding, so they don't. It's just a completely neutral mutation.
because he couldn't understand the paper. The paper said in that.
Sounds like you're breaking up a little bit.
Hello?
You were cutting out in and out a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you still there? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me talking? I can hear you.
Oh, is it better now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So what I was saying is that you're right. So you think it's a contradiction because he doesn't understand. Well, he Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, I think there's a huge delay now.
Okay. So he the paper said that the median length 52, but for some reason he thinks that they should only be 52. So I guess he didn't understand it.
They're supposed to be non-coding and de novo.
Oh,
they arose
delay.
from nothing and they do nothing. Well, when they
Um,
mutate, they cause disease.
If I research it, would that affect anything?
I think it would kick you off. Try just rejoining. because I think there's a huge delay right now. Seems like it's at least 30 seconds. Here, I'll just remove you. Actually, I don't know if I can kick him out or not. Technical difficulties, folks. It's always fun. All the folks that are listening in right now, the one person, one or two people. Well, while we're waiting, maybe we'll back up a little bit. Get that whole thing, because we kind of skipped around there.
Sure. So they contradicted by what orphan genes are and said that these are orphan genes when they're actually not. For example, this one, the GTSR-CR1 gene, encodes for 137 amino acid long protein. And here's the link to that. It's all in our book. I should be linking that anyway, but I'll do it at the end. So if you notice, these genes, when they mutate, they actually cause disease. An orphan gene is supposed to be a dead gene that doesn't do anything. They're supposed to be non-coding and de novo. They arose from nothing and they do nothing. Well, when they mutate, they cause disease. And we found that they actually do something. So these 8 de novo genes that are found in the chimps are protein coding genes. So look at what the Max Planck Institute in Germany stated. They stated that if orphan genes represent valid human protein coding genes, that it would be concluded that the vast majority of orphans were born after the divergence of chimps and could not have been shared.
And as we've been over, that was not the case. So he's trying to say that 137 is too long to be an orphan gene, therefore they contradicted themselves, and that this hypothetical that they said would give this result, well, they rejected this hypothetical in the paper. So it seems like he's just looking for keywords that he wants to spin his narrative, storytelling again. He's just patching together different quotes like a Frankenstein and leaving out the parts that he doesn't like, which is that they rejected that. All right, let's see. Mikey's coming back in, but he's not connected. There goes. Hey, can you hear me? I'm going to keep trying. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think there's just a big delay. I guess rejoining didn't work.
I think there is a big delay.
If you want to try resetting your, maybe just restart the computer or restart the router. That might work. Or, I know you wanted to finish your thing on this, so we could try that. If not, this might be a good place to wrap it up if we can't fix that. But I know you want to finish your thing on the orphan genes, at least.
So let me see. Well, not sure how far it lies, but if it's continuing that way, then we can do it. We can like finish up maybe next week. Any day this week.
Yeah, just try try the router first. That would be the easiest. Unless your windows are still frozen.
Yeah, so I did the router thing, so I'm trying to maybe just get rid of some of the tabs I have open.
I'm not sure what causes that kind of lag. Well, I guess the only other thing is restarting your computer, right?
Let's see. Let's try the let's try the restarting.
God's just trying to shut us down.
Okay. So it seems like there is yes, it seems like we're having an issue here. So what I would do is we can cut it off here, and we would resume Gene's argument, so we can from there and end the video, do the rest of the video, because at the ending of this video is pretty much them. So there's not much to handle on this one. Then we can start the.
Sounds good, man. All right, yeah, I think we've through a decent chunk today, so it's a good place to stop. All right, and well, thanks for joining me, and thanks for our viewers, and thanks to SFT and RawMatt just for hanging in there and trying as hard as they can, and giving us some fodder to refute. So, all right, I guess we'll wrap it up there, and we'll pick it up probably next Sunday again, and or maybe sometime between then. But we'll see then. All right. Good night.